Tony, can you check the remote attendees and see?
There's
who we-
2 folks on
Please.
there.
Alex,
Oh, yeah, let me hop off.
you better, that's against the rules.
I was testing to make.
How's your personal Zoom?
Just somebody named Greg.
Right? We never get this kind of a turnout. We definitely should have done a
Could be
cover
Greg.
charge.
Is it this Greg?
No.
Okay, just making sure.
Thanks.
I don't think so, since he doesn't have a device. You haven't joined the meeting virtually.
It's maybe Greg Rickman.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Maybe.
All right. Are we ready? All right. It is 5:33 and I am calling to order the January 27th, 2025 BOSAC meeting. So Duke, if we could do roll call.
Matt Powers.
Here.
Kristen Joyce.
Here.
David Rossi. Nikki LaRochelle.
Here.
Chris Tennell.
Here.
Bobby Zanka. Jay Beckerman.
Present.
Great.
So any thoughts or issues with the minutes from December 16th?
Nope.
Okay, I'll move to approve those minutes.
Second.
Great. Public comment on anything not on the agenda. Welcome, everyone. Happy to have you. Hi, Joel. Welcome. Okay. All right, great. We'll move on to our discussion.
Just a quick agenda
Oh, right.
changes.
My mistake.
First of all, thanks we have a different sequence than is normal to accommodate OSAC. Thanks for coming, everybody. So staff summaries later on, and we may table the OST ambassador discussion depending on time. If so, we can discuss that at a future meeting.
Yes, my mistake. I forgot that, Duke. And we
Problem.
also made some amendment to our questions on the Camp Hale discussion, which we'll get to. So those
Great.
are changes, right?
Okay, well, our first discussion item is John Bozio is here from Merge, the signage consultant that Town of Breck has hired to help design a comprehensive sign plan for our open space program. And this is John's 3rd site visit over the course of the contract, most recently in October. And now he's back with the final design draft. And he incorporated a bunch of the feedback that he's gotten from BOSAC, but also across the community, and he'll outline that. But it would be great tonight to get feedback from OSAC, BOSAC, Forest Service. We love any input that we can get on this. Tomorrow, John will be presented to council as well as another focus group that Alex will be hosting. We okay? Okay. And next steps will be he'll incorporate the feedback and provide some final deliverables, but we'll work with him on some of the location plans and specific designs and cost estimates. So we'll have one more, I don't know, review period with John before getting the final deliverables at the end of March. And the hope is to install the new sign package as a pilot program, probably in the Illinois Creek area is what we're thinking this summer, and go from there.
Do we, before John gets going, should we do our intros?
Oh, thank you very much.
I know we're helping each other
Yes,
out.
We're kind of winging it. Thanks for being here. And we need to do, Nikki has introductions plan. Let's all introduce ourselves.
Yes, I have a fun question. I know our agenda is full, but in an effort to, create cohesion and camaraderie amongst us, I have a question you can answer when you introduce yourself. Please share a band, song, or album that was formative in your adolescence. So Chris, can I kick it off? Can we go this way? Go ahead.
Oh, Nikki. Chris Tennell, Breckenridge, about 30 years, been on BOSAC combined. I think I'm going on about 10 between the off and ons. God dang it. Former punk, so probably Social Distortion. Former. Just trying to make Joel happy.
Oh, you got a fan.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead. Bobby.
Bobby Zanka. I've been in Breck full-time for about 4 years and many years before that part-time. And Dark Side of the Moon.
Right.
Jay Beckerman, I'm the town council liaison for BOSAC. And I would say Whitesnake would be, yeah. Most
All right. Julia Puster, and I'm the assistant director for community development, so I'm not BOSAC, but I've worked for the town for 18 years, and I'm gonna say Madonna.
I'm Alex Stack. I'm the coordinator with the town's open space and trails program. Been here for about a year and a half. And say Country Roads, John Denver.
I'm Allison Morton. I'm a resource specialist in Summit County Open Space and Trails. I'd say Garth Brooks. Laura Rossler. So this is a fun one. I'm really excited about that. And I'd have to say the Rolling Stones and Too Many Songs.
Great.
Paul Simber, member of OSAC, member of our 45-year resident here in the county, 4 decades with Forest Service. Sound of Silence, that one's up.
Aaron Swanson, out of the Frisco side of the OSAG. Probably an evening bike journey or fun.
Oh, yeah.
Also, here doing that for a year. All the bands that are forming, I'm sure what's
Yeah.
but all those girls.
Right.
Jeff Zimmerman. 40 years now. I have to say there was 2 or 3 albums done.
John, you gotta do it.
Where's your pop?
Jordan Mead. I worked for Summit County Open Space for the past 5 years. I'm gonna go Skull and Roses. Grateful Dead.
Nice. I'm Catherine King. I'm the director of the Open Space and Trails Department for Summit County. I've been in the county about 20 years now, and I'm gonna go with Bob Dylan.
I'm Duke Barlow. I'm the Town of Breck Open Space and Trails Manager. I have been in BOSAC 8 years prior and early Springsteen.
Tony Overlock with the town of Breckenridge. I am the open space and operations supervisor and been with the town for almost 20 years. And I would have to say it was Jimi Hendrix. Are you experienced?
I'm Matt Powers. I've been in Breck for 25-ish years, off and on. BOSAC for 7 or 8, I think. I think early on there was a lot of like Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath, but it sort of evolved into a more reasonable Elvis Costello phase. And it moved on from there, yeah.
I'm Kristen Joyce. I've been on BOSAC 3 years.
Yeah.
I think so. This is my first term, almost at the end of it. I was raised here in Breckenridge, so I've been here most of my life. I guess I would say we used to have this like 4 CD pack of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young that we would listen to on road trips. So I'd say that would be formative.
Awesome. Dave Rossi, I've been this tour of BOSAC, a couple of tours of BOSAC. One was about 20 years ago, closing in on 20 years ago. And this time it's probably been 4 years this round. I took over for Carol Sade when she jumped on to town council. And Stevie Wonder.
That's nice.
It's nice.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
it is. Not at all, not at all. I'm Nikki LaRochelle. I've been on BOSAC for 6 years. I'm gonna say Alanis Morissette, which was a nice deviation from my Western evangelical Christian inheritance. So, yeah. Okay, I think that was good. Did that quickly.
Okay, John, happy to have you.
Well, thank you, everybody. Again, I'm John Bozio with Merge, and this is our third trip to talk about the signage project. First trip really was information. Are we on? There you go. Our first trip was information gathering. Our second was to present some initial concepts. We got a lot of feedback from that. We're going to go through that. And now we've sort of developed it even further, added a couple different elements. So we're going to go through some of the stakeholder comments. There are a lot I will go through. I'm not going to hit every single one. I'm just going to give you a summary. We were asked to look at some digital and creative examples of how we could bring those kind of elements into the program. There's some examples up front, but then you also see that when we get into the updated design. And we have some different sign menus beyond the updated design, just to show you what the front country, mid country, back country might look like. And then you also had asked to look at internal scenarios, which we've done. This is a list of who we met with previously. They've been involved throughout the project at both stages. And then we've also had lots of meetings with Duke and his team to review our progress as we've gotten to this point. So I'm just going to go through some of the concepts or some of the comments that we got, because there were a lot. And I know there's people who've not seen the work previously. Again, there's a couple pages of these, but I hope what you'll realize from is we got a lot of comments, and a lot of comments is better than not many comments, because we can really sort of shape it for this project. One was to look at more sort of the incorporation of digital elements and creative elements. You'll see that next with some examples of sort of not products, but digital elements that you can utilize and creative elements that you can integrate into the system. Some of these things, most of these things are not really in our scope. We're really here to do signage, but they're things that could be incorporated, like a digital screen into a kiosk or something like that. So we could talk about that, definitely. A lot of discussion with the county and the town and even U.S. Forestry on ownership and identity, and how much of it needed to be the same, what pieces can be different, when did you push that forward, when did you bring it back. That was a little bit tricky in the sense that we sort of went back and forth about it, but we've landed in a really good spot with that. One of the main things that came out of the council meeting last time was that the trails and the preserve should be the same. We had presented options where we were doing different designs for each. That came out that would be the same design. Existing signage, we don't need to use the existing structures, although there are some kiosks that we could implement. There was discussion about new posts and old posts and how we would handle that. And the friendly etiquette signs were appreciated, and we've incorporated those and kept those in the system as well. You'll see the options upcoming. I'm just going to go through them real quick of what we presented last time. But option one, the shape of the sign was recognizable. They really liked, groups really liked the trailhead cap, and that's where we're sort of bringing in the artistic component to it, or sort of graphic component, but not having it as the Breckenridge logo, because obviously we share trails with the county. So you'll see how we've handled that. And then some minor comments regarding the kiosk and the regulatory signage. Both the color accent and the full color were sort of favored. We've stayed with the color accent. General design comments, the vertical totem is preferred. You'll see that as the trailhead, getting it up, obviously because of the snow. Pop of color, the posts don't need to stand out. So there was lots of different things. We've gone through this and sort of checked it off as we've gone through the new design to make sure these things are in here. General signage content, more pictograms, less wordy. That was a big one that we heard a lot of. Activities, we had a conversation, and it's still more of a strategy thing going forward. Do you list what you can do and can't do, or just what you can't do? So regardless of our design that we have tonight, that can be a decision that's made. incorporate emergency locator number, include distance and time on trail, include trail difficulty. You'll see all this in the very first sign type that we looked at. Spanish, we did meet with Mountain Dreamers and got comments back from them. Spanish for paragraphs only, but proper words for direction is fine. And again, use of pictograms is always helpful. Primary regulatory etiquette message, just sharing the trail and yielding to users. You'll see a little bit of that. And the kiosk content, we had to add a legal liability sign that came up later to it, and add contact information. So all that can be incorporated into froze.
Hit task manager. And then close out and see if it works now. Just hit the X in the top right, Tony, and see if it should work again.
Top edge.
No, on the window itself.
Oh, John, can you do that? Close it. There we go. All right,
Okay.
great.
Maintenance, that's a big deal with all of this, making it easy to upkeep. Obviously, these guys have to upkeep a number of posts that are out there. We can't have multiple posts. That's why we limit it back to one, and limit the number of parts of the sign. Really, for OSAC, signage, reducing signage clutter is a big piece of this. So we've also tried to limit the number of sizes of posts and panels. You'll see that I have some full-size mock-ups. Some wayfinding comments showcasing the wayfinding strategy deeper into the trail network. You'll see that a little bit later on in the presentation. Include smaller kiosks to be located deeper in. We have that as well. And additional comments, we're going to be developing a phasing strategy. And we talked about considering listing non-permanent activities. So, and we heard from the forestry to include them. They also have pictograms that are open to or closed to. So that might be a lead that from a strategic standpoint. So just real quick with the digital and creative examples, there's different things you can do. Whether it's, you could have a bicycle counter, which I think is a really cool idea in the sense that it really goes to reinforcing your brand as an outdoor active community. You can institute things like iBeacons that push information to someone's phone if they've downloaded a specific app. But you could have real-time information, e-paper displays on kiosks. They're more like a Kindle rather than sort of a flashy element that might be on a kiosk. You could always do interactive digital kiosks as well. Some of these things like the interactive or the e-paper display, that could certainly be incorporated into the design of the kiosk. Creative identifier. So you'll see this in the design, but there's different things that you could do. We have the cap on it, but there's sort of custom or artful finials. We've done creative crosswalks. We talked about putting things on the ground last time and leading people to different places. You don't always have to have a sign. You can visually wayfind to something. That Newark in the middle there, that's more of a beacon. So again, you can create a trail if you have a specific trail that you want to lead people through, and you'll see that in a moment. And you can have ornamental elements on the kiosks, and those could be by local artists. They could just be artful elements that are creative to each different place where they appear. We've incorporated that into the design. One of the ideas was creating like a Breck loop, like in the downtown, that somebody who is visiting and they're not sort of an experienced hiker, maybe they do want to take a loop. We could talk about what that actual loop would be, but it's really sort of this branded element that you could have breadcrumbs, and it doesn't always have to be a sign. It's just that graphic language could lead you to to the area that you're going. So this isn't, the photos are just different areas or sort of gave us examples of how you could incorporate more of an environmental branding element to it. It doesn't have to be called the Breck Loop. If this is something you want to pursue further, it's something we heard a lot from the stakeholders of having sort of a downtown loop. That would be helpful. So that's just a consideration as you go forward. These were the three previous options. This was option one. Obviously, this one had the roof line, which was sort of hint back to the logo, which really didn't fly that much, obviously, because we have county and town shared trails. But the cap, the idea of the cap was a good idea, but not two poles, one. This was another kiosk where the having a roof was something that could be considered. But having a single pole that was a totem that was favorable, and we've incorporated that in. And then this was option three with a series of panels, and these were even the regulatory signs. I mean, the main thing here was having full color, and then we also had this overhead sign, which we sort of deleted from the project. So between those three designs and all the comments we got, we have landed on this final design offering. These are the signs in the front country. So before we get into like the structures, one of the things that we identified was all that information that people were requesting at the trailhead, in addition to on a kiosk where you have community events and maps and other things like broader information. Was there a way to simplify it and co-locate it on a single panel? So we've been referring to this as the nutrition label, I think, like a nutrition label on the back of something. It would go on that main totem, and this is sort of the size of it. So it would be, about this, about this height. It's an 8-inch square post, and there's different information that's on there. So we have the trail name, you'd have a map of that general area that you're entering. You have the trail difficulty, trail information. There was a request for some trail specifications, permitted or not permitted information or activities, the logos of who's managing those particular trails, and the potential of an emergency locator. So that's sort of more of a typical trail. At the all persons, there's more information that's needed. So we have the cross slope and the running slope. So the map gets a little bit shorter. And then we just did, there's probably going to be multiple sort of layouts of this based on what might be a need. But here you see, if you don't need that many pictograms, you only need 3. They obviously get better. Or if you didn't need a map, you could have a smaller version of it. So these are the first signs you would see at the beginning of a trail. Obviously a sign type that gets you to it from the roadway. And then you have the trailhead sign. So it has that one single panel on one pole on the side of it. This is just one sign. This is the side that has the name of the trail that you would see from a distance. You have sort of this beacon cap that cues you that that's where an entrance is. This would be the same everywhere, and it would not be color coded. You would not want to color code it because that would confuse somebody thinking that maybe these are color coded trails and they're not. So this would be sort of and we could work on the graphic or that sort of thing, but there's a element at the top that gives you a recognition of this is the trailhead. And then we have the kiosk, and we'll zoom in on this, but it has an area for the map, for the legal information that has to be posted, the rules, community events, leave no trace, and then an interpretive panel. So here's just a quick rendering of what a cap could look like. And you'll see this in some of the photo renderings as well. So there's the kiosk, and you can see on the right, there could be an interpretive story, but that could also change out to bilingual information. So that's probably where that bilingual information wants to come. That's where you have paragraphs and rules and that sort of thing. On the totem, you're really relying on the pictograms and those sort of elements. And again, at the bottom, you're reinforcing the managers of that particular trail. If the trail was a co-managed trail, there's an artistic element that can go at the bottom. And we would want it to say Breckenridge, Summit County, so it's sort of recognizable, but this could be an artistic element. And then if you were on a trail that was a Town of Breckenridge trail, it would say Town of Breckenridge, be real clear. And then they could be all different elements from kiosk to kiosk. That would be up to you as to how you would go about and do that. But it's just an added piece where we still have a framework for all the information that's needed. Here's another one. Some other options, we were asked to look at maybe just adding a panel or two to an existing kiosk. So for the ones that we don't necessarily want to build something new, you could do this. And then you'll see these regulatory signs. We had really wordy ones before. Now we're relying much more on pictograms. There are two sizes. There's one size to it, but two formats. So you could have a horizontal. Make sure it's not upside down. Horizontal that stacks, or you could just have one that is a thing, when you really want to make a statement and there's just one thing to post, it's one, but it's the same size panel, right? So Tony's only buying one size panel. And then you can decide when it's one, when it's three. And we've started to outline a variety of messages. So are there 4 messages or 4 pictograms? Are there 3? If there's only 1 or 2, then you're probably going to go to the vertical one as well. So it's giving you a lot. It's giving you a template to lay these things out. And when we talk about the menus, these are not new, right? You have these. We went back and went through all the photos and these are all the messages that are out there. So, and there's probably more. So I don't want you to think that we're just saying sign after sign after sign. We're not. Those signs are out there. In fact, we're trying to condense signage when you can bring multiple sign messages to a single panel with multiple pictograms. And then on the, I'll just go back real quick. So on the far right here, we have the trail directional. So once you get into the trail and you want to give people direction, there's sign panels here that can give you the trail difficulty, but you can combine them in different ways. You could have multiple directions. You could have the QR code. That's sort of the standard, that there's a QR code with the trail map on it, sort of adding that digital component. And sometimes you have to share a trail and it has multiple difficulties. Sometimes you may want to have let people know more regulatory information once they're internal to the trail. So that's about the size of what that is on the totem. So it really, again, these are all basically the same size panels, 1, 2, 3, and then the square. So we're minimizing the number of different sizes that might be out there. For the kiosk, I brought this because as you can see sort of the ornamentation of what you could do. Not these actual things, but this is sort of the aluminum, where you could do Corten steel and cut it out and have sort of ornamentation and artistic elements on those signs. They fall, they're loud. And then once you get into the trail, you can have another series of sign types. We were asked to add a smaller kiosk, like internal, once you're in there, where a new trail may start and you may want to add a map. That can be this double post, or you could go back to the trailhead and have a kiosk that's similar in size. Again, this is the same size as what you're adding to the kiosk. So it's that kit of parts where you have a large kiosk made up of 2 pieces. This is the second piece. Mile markers. And then where trails sort of transition to a new trail, you're going to have to just let people know that they've transitioned to a new segment or a new name. So here's that one shot we showed you before. Before we had another sign in the background and it was very wordy. This is welcome. There is a sign out there now that welcomes you to Cucumber Gulch Preserve. We're telling you what you can do. And then you're having the map and the beacon on it. So it really cleans up what's out there now. So it's not that every trail gets all this stuff, right? What we're giving you is a menu, a toolbox of how you can handle different scenarios. So we did look at really the front country and the mid country are pretty much the same. Mid country doesn't necessarily need a huge kiosk. They can go to the smaller one. But for the most part, a lot of these elements are similar between the two. In the back country, you can go down and have just really simple trailhead identifier. You don't have to have the large one. You're always going to have the regulatory signs and the totems, and they're just needed as required based on the scenario. You can see we have the mile marker and then a spot for the etiquettes, the existing etiquette signs. And the internal trail scenarios, we just looked at a couple. We look at Mini Mine Trail. This was really to look at when there's multiple trail connectors and what types of signs would happen. So as you're coming down Mini Mine, you may get a directional sign that gives you direction to other to the side door trail. And then when you get to the side door trail, you could have a kiosk there that gives you orientation to what makes up that area. And these are things we'll continue to develop with the staff, just sort of dropping it in. So you could see on the design, the trail ahead had that sort of creative element, but when you get to the totems, it's just this simple blue element that you can acts as a key, a visual key that there's information ahead. And then as you approach it, you can start to get the information you need. But you see the trail difficulty, you have the QR code. This is the bottom of the B&B trail, and this was really for overlapping trails. So sometimes the trails come together and you may need additional information at those intersections, identifying those elements or those trails. So here it dropped in. And then it's top of Red Pig Trail. This is one-way conflicts where you have a one trails going in opposite ways, and you could have so here you're having like a warning sign as well as adding in the smaller kiosk at particular points. This is location 5. So as you come in there, you have it, and then you may have the rules sign as you're approaching that one way to give a heads up to that information. So these are scenarios that will continue to work with the staff to develop the appropriate sign types at each. And then as Duke mentioned, also working towards a pilot program of, for a variety of placements of different sign types. Oh, and that one more, top of Moonstone Trail. This was multiple one ways as well. So you may have that trailhead identifying the entrance, and then you have a trail directional, but on the side you're adding when you're transitioning into that new into the new trail and just identifying that, and then the regulatory trail. So that's one sign. That's not 2 signs. We're trying to keep this minimum and trying to use all 4 sides as much as possible. And there you can see how that pops against the environment. So with that, we'll take any questions, and I can go back to some of these slides as necessary.
Thanks, John. That's great. I was thinking we could start with OSAC, our guest, but I also thought it might help if Tony or staff spoke to the feasibility of just the implementation or any notes on that piece.
Real quick, I just want to throw in there to head it off. We did talk to Sam Massman with the Forest Service, and one thing that isn't included here that we'll make sure is included is having the Forest Service logo where appropriate, in addition to Summit County and Town of Breck.
Yeah. Yeah, real quick, I think overall staff is really pleased with how Merge handled all the feedback from different levels and tried to incorporate it into these new designs. And I think a lot of the information is presented and there's a lot of options for us, which is great. in some ways. And then I think in some ways for us and staff to figure out implementation and how it actually looks in the ground will take some time. And I think, all this is it's a framework for us to move forward, and then we can kind of dial it in and move forward what makes sense and what's, cost effective and efficient. And, but we're happy with what we see, and just, we're interested to get your input and see what you guys.
There's a certain level
Yeah.
of signage in general, but in this particular project, there's a certain level of it is standardized, right? So with those messages, the regulatory messages, there are things that you could buy as an attic stock that you get those messages on a regular basis, and you can just have them and put those up as needed. But and then there's standardization on what's going on in the kiosk. The kiosk always has, for the most part, the same information. It's when you get into the directional signs and the information at the particular trailhead, that's always going to be customized to a certain degree. The messaging is customized, but what we've done is given a structure that is the same throughout.
OSAC, what do you think? Let's hear from you first.
Wow. First off, kudos to the team, and a tremendous amount of energy went in. Great presentation, you went into a lot of detail. My first gut reaction is too urban for the Summit County community. And that then translate that back to the 3 different zones, I guess. You got front country, back country, and 4 maybe?
Mid-country.
Back. Yeah. So this might be appropriate in the core area because it is a very urban type environment that we have here. And we really need to educate those folks because they don't even know how to drive downtown. But once you start to get into the front country and back country, it seems the experience we want to offer there is more towards a natural environment. And this, I think, is a little bit too much bringing the urban into the back country. That's my gut feel. The other is a question maybe to Adam and Sam, is once you get into the backcountry where you're interfacing with the Forest Service and specifically the Golden Horseshoe area, that's under special use permits to the county, I believe. And would an implementation of this have to go through some kind of process of reviewing or updating the master plan, management plan with the special use permit? But that's just my idea.
I was wondering, how this integrates with Forest Service signage and the county signage. And there is neighborhood signage out there in places where people put up signs. And none of it looks like this. So
there's a certain point with wayfinding when you're integrating multiple systems is that there's a handshake that happens between them. So it's not the intent that this system would go all throughout the Forestry Service. There's a certain point where 1, language would match up, and then 2, there would a handshake would happen between the 2 systems where that system then takes over. That's really a case by case scenario as to when that needs to happen.
I have a couple things I would like to offer. Things such as the colorations, I don't know, what was being represented here is maybe Paul's touching on this in my mind is, bright and glaring, almost not glaring. That's not the right word, but it's bright and very obvious. I think there's a 2-way street there. One, now you can see what's going on there, but maybe it's a little bit too much. So maybe look at your colorings. I do really like having a different sign at the trailhead versus once you're into the trails. I think that's an important element. I really do like how you add, like in the kiosk, you've added space for casual signage, special event signage or whatever the case may be there. And you can go to we've all been to every trailhead throughout the West, and there's stuff tacked onto the column. And it drives me nuts when you see that kind of stuff. So I would even maybe offer more space for that, depending upon the location. Well, let me back up. That's kiosks, so that's the trailhead. beginning, right? Once you're back in the country. So I think those are my first initial reactions, the colors. We like the entranceway to a trailhead versus once you're into the trailhead. And then even more room to minimize the impact of site clutter. I really like the content. I think it's really nice. Makes it very user friendly. Is there any discussion of what the, excuse me, the materials are in terms of like longevity? Like
Yeah, so,
limiters are pretty gnarly, right? So
yeah,
wood, is it steel? Is it
yeah, so the
produced
poles are, the
in-house?
poles are wood and they're similar to what's out there now. Tony, how long do we get
We're getting 15 to 15 years or so.
out of the pole, out of the wood poles? There's a lot of different, there's a variety of materials that can be used for all the panels. Less expensive, last as long, more expensive, last longer. There's nothing, it's the cheapest that's last long. I wish there was. This is printed right to aluminum. So I have this, I could pass this around. So is this. This is a direct embed product that you could do. This is very durable. You get a 10-year warranty on it. Or you could go to something like this, which is thinner and it's aluminum and it's just vinyl. So this is sort of on the, you can scratch it and that sort of thing. You just have to decide from a cost standpoint where you're going to sort of fall within that world.
Are these signs producible with Pony's crew in-house, or you have to go to the vendor to replace them when they get?
So there's a certain amount that would be standardized that he can set up with somebody just to order them and have them. But the ones that are at the trailheads, which are always a unique message, you would always have to go out and get that.
Okay. So I think one other comment I thought about it, some of these signs, you see them overhanging the edge of the wood column.
Yeah.
Those typically areas where you're gonna get more damage, bent in, vandalism. So I like how a lot of this is the 8-inch pole.
Yeah,
Some
that was a,
show didn't have that.
yeah, that was a specific design consideration. So you see them, they're all edge to edge. There is one in the back country that we realized was a little bit over, but what you're basically saying is it's not hanging over, so I can't pull it off. So that was, I would want to always keep that just from a vandalism standpoint.
How many signs do you guys anticipate roughly?
I wanted to clarify one thing on the posts though, because you guys might not be aware that all the posts you see out there right now are 6x6. They're not 8x8. So I think it's important for you to think about, the scale of those posts. With that vertical sign you had, John, was a really good example of, they will be more visible and they will be bigger if we decide to go with the 8x8 option. In my mind, that's a pretty significant change throughout our system. It will be a different look. It's a noticeably larger post. And we want to make sure you guys are comfortable with that in concept. And in the end, it might not even be super practical for us to replace. That's also a lot of work and a lot of expense to replace every single one of those posts. So we may not decide that's appropriate even everywhere. Maybe we decide it is somewhere, but not. But wanted to make sure you guys knew that what's being proposed is a larger post throughout.
It's an 8x8. So the amount of information that was requested at the trailheads, you can only make the sign so small without it then being either illegible or just way too loaded, or having to make the sign larger. So if you took all this information and then wanted to put it on a 6x6 post, it's all going to come down much smaller. And we could always look at it in both sizes, but you have to have there's a give and take with the amount of information you want to include, the legibility, and the size of the sign, right? So even when we do community wayfinding and copy has to be 6 inches high on high-speed roads, well, that makes a sign 8 feet wide, right? So information, size of panel, size of sign.
One more clarifying question on that, then, so would be more at the trailhead kiosk, and then the aluminum pieces, is that the size of the mile marker?
Right,
Okay.
that's more this size. And this is what's out there now, which is 6x6.
But isn't that what you would envision being at all the portal posts, not just at the trailhead? I might be confused on that.
Yeah, I mean, Tony and I, and we've been talking about this, and it's something to play with. You know, we could try to change this 8-inch wide to a 6-inch wide and see how it looks. We could do some sort of hybrid where we have 8 inches at the trail portals and keep our 6s inside. We could see how it looks to hang it over, because really where these are, it's really facing one direction, so it could be overhanging. But definitely,
That was the other thing we looked at, is overhanging it on a 6x6, but then we ran back to this problem of that's a much easier grab.
but
It's all pros, cons, give and take
I'd
as you
say
go
it's
through this.
been a very important consideration. Switching all our posts to 8x8 is not something we would take lightly.
And we're not. So the directional signs are 6x6, the mile markers are 6x6, the trail on there are 6x6. It's just a trailhead.
A little electric puck that could connect with an app. I don't know if you guys looked into that further for backcountry or for a little bit less visual or.
For everybody, that's an iBeacon. You would have to have you would have to promote a specific app. Maybe it's the BREC app, I don't know. You would have to obviously request push information. Then as you went by it, it's just a Bluetooth signal that would push information to you. You'd have to decide which beacon would push what type of information to you.
Good and bad in the backcountry to have, you may or may not have, but it'd be less visible.
We did try to include a QR code. So in the backcountry, you could have at least that would give you a map to download as well. Or you could decide what it would be at a certain point where you would download.
I do like the content. I mean, what you're bringing forward, what your story you're telling on those signs, I think is really appropriate in today's world myself, you know.
If I'm down to color, I can solve it. Color we can solve.
I have a couple things. I'm assuming since OSAC is here too, there's a desire for compatibility with signage. And so one of my questions is related to the county's budget. And are they able to absorb this type of cost and this higher level of type of signage, you know, the decorative pieces and the bigger posts and all of that? Something that I wonder about since our budget is different than the town's. I agree with Paul and Jeff about color, fitting in to the natural surroundings. We definitely have a front country, mid country, and back country, but it goes to back country quickly, especially in the nature of the terrain, which creates for trails that are not easy. And this is it's so nice that it may set an expectation that people aren't going to find. Right away off the B&B trailhead, you get into rocky, hard, challenging, steep trails. And so I would say, the trail signage shouldn't be so fancy that they're thinking more of an urban experience than what's going to be there. That's just a little thing, but I'm just thinking about how people think and react to trails. To back up, this is a great thing to see happening. New signage, better signage, more useful and educational, informative signage has been a long time in coming. And so really thanks to the town of Breck for taking the charge here and including the county, which is awesome, and the Forest Service. So there is more compatibility and understanding and less confusion with people. I agree with Jeff about what you're showing. I think one of the biggest things that's missing right now is firm, consistent, direct was the term that was used, language on etiquette. And we need that. I think we're beyond sugarcoating and being friendly, and we just need to tell people how it is so they know exactly what to expect, whether it's a wildlife situation or a human situation or a resource damage one. And this gives you much more opportunity to do that. So it's nice to see that coming. Let's see, if you needed to make things, remove some stuff so it fit better. I used to write guidebooks, and I don't know how many of you know what I did, but elevation gain just goes over a lot of heads. But those of us that live up here understand elevation gain. But we already know, or we're going to check trail forks or whatever, whether we're hiking or biking or whatever. But for others, if you, I know that's not a lot of space, but elevation gain does have its spot there. And maybe mileage is nice. I think that's always beneficial for wayfinding. But maybe elevation gain isn't all that necessary because someone's like, what's 236 feet of elevation gain? Just a suggestion if you have to tighten things up and fit on a smaller post or something. And then the last thing is just, you know, some of your trailheads are busy, our trailheads. And if the signage is hard to read, people will spend longer there trying to read it or take pictures, etc. And there's only so many people that can fit around some of these, even the narrower ones that have like the maps and stuff. So it's great that you're attempting for it to be big and visible and not cluttered, so people can quickly get what they need and move on, which for most people is to take a picture of the sign and have it available as they're recreating. That's what I see a lot of people doing, and it makes a ton of sense. You can grab all the information in 1 or 2 pictures and then explore it as you need to along the trail. So those are just things that stand out. I mean, overall, I just, you know, now we'll be able to reap the benefits as just a plain old person instead of having to have more and more input, because there's going to be some absolute benefits to this. And there's obviously plenty of people with a lot of good ideas, and you're so far along. And so thanks for sharing with us and asking for our feedback and getting this process going. And I think just tweet, like you guys are saying, tweak some now, tweak some as you go. I like the idea a lot of a test area. I was working as a consultant for the town of Breckenridge when Jan Prowl and I did the first signs. And just figuring out if the arrow actually pointed the right way instead of up or down or what, it's so hard. So to have a test area to figure out, is this showing the right direction? Is it showing the right thing before you invest too much money? I think that's a really good idea because this is a pretty costly project. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Comments?
Greg, you want to have any thoughts?
I mean, I guess I don't know the scope of how deep these signs are gonna go. I would generally probably advocate for fewer signs, really in general, just that, you know, fewer signs create a little bit of an adventure. They create a little bit of an exploration. People also are looking at the trails on their phones, and have access to that. So these to me seem like awesome signs for the rec path or for the trail to the troll. But I think I would probably say as you go deeper than that. So again, like if I need the scope, even seeing like stuff up on side door and back door, like I don't know. I think that you lose some of that adventure of exploration in the oversign.
Catherine, did you want to speak to Laura's question about the budget piece?
Sure. No, that's fine. Let's see. I guess I would just say that I think it was Tony actually that phrased it really well, or one of you was kind of couching this as, this is our toolbox to draw from, right? So Town of Breck has initiated this process, hired a consultant, like, tell us what our options are, tell us what you see in other places, and design something that could work for us. Now I think it's up to us to take what they've done and decide where it makes sense and how to implement these things. And I'm with you. I love the idea of a test area. You know, we do this in a small area. You guys all get to look at it. We ask the public what they think about it before we do anything else. And certainly this would not be something that we could take on in partnership without, you know, a significant budget request. If the county wanted to go in on this 50-50, or if we just decided that, you know, there was some aspect of this process that we could contribute to, but maybe not all of it. You know, so I guess I would just say we kind of haven't gotten into that level of detail yet. And I think there are a lot of variables still there on what we actually decide to implement and to pull from this toolbox. And at what point we decide to implement all of it, and then coming up with cost estimates and requesting that and figuring out how to fund it. So I know that's a little ambiguous, but I think that's the best I can offer at this point. Yeah.
With that idea in mind of the test area, where would it be that we would be able to incorporate all the issues?
Well, that,
Everywhere.
that might be impossible, but we were kicking around the idea of Illinois Creek, but you have the troll, you have a little bit of everything where you have use restrictions and a lot of people, different user types. You have a couple hiking only trails there. You have, bikers and dog walkers and winter use, and it ties into the larger network at Wakefield. And it's also fairly easy access for so that was our thought of where to start.
What about the jurisdictional handshake zones we're talking about? Where it transitions to national forest or it gets
Yeah.
into the co-op ownership zones, things like that. Is that important for a test area?
That's a good question. We haven't answered that question. I don't know, Paul. I mean, it's certainly like your question about, do we need to adjust the management plan for Golden Horseshoe? Like, those are answers we need to find, whether it's part of the test area or not. Those are the things
Right.
we need to flesh out, but I'm not sure if that, one of the attractions as I see it to the Illinois Creek idea is it's just town of Breck, so we're not stepping on any other toes when we try this.
Jared, I know you asked about the interactive piece with like QR code, et cetera, but did you have other feedback beyond that?
No, I'm just kind of similar to everybody else here too, that, the less signs, the better. They're beautiful signs and we definitely need the information in a lot of the spots. But it does, I guess to the point of where it's almost too inviting in some of the spots. It's too urban and, some of the backcountry spots don't necessarily need that much.
Mm.
But yeah, beautifully done.
I see something like this wherever we have asphalt trails, because my experience has been with some interviewed people, different times along the trail. And there are a lot of people that really don't know where their signage like this along the main bike trails would be very helpful.
BOSAC, what are we thinking? Who wants to dive in here?
I'll go. Okay. Thanks for everybody's feedback. That was great. I had some of the same feelings, I think. And I think this might actually just be the next step of collaboration with staff of what kind of criteria we want to set for where a kiosk is. Like I kind of bristled too when I saw a kiosk at like the back door, side door entrance, like anything that's not at a trailhead to me feels a little bit less appropriate. And I get that the wayfinding is super important and I take it for granted that I know these trails. We all know these trails really well. And so of course I don't need a kiosk there and someone else might. But I agree with the kind of the losing the sense of adventure. We did too good. Probably have never heard that you've done too good of a job with how beautiful these signs are that it makes the trails seem like they're very approachable when they're not going to be approachable for everybody. So I think that was a really interesting point, Laura.
Listen, real quick on just your question about mini kiosk.
Yeah.
What do you think about like the kiosk B option where it's like just the single post? And
Yeah.
it's a little more vicinity of where you are and it's a little more minimized.
Yeah.
Do you feel comfortable with this?
Yeah, I think so. I think that that's where maybe we kind of talk through what the criteria is. Something like, I don't think it belongs in the backcountry. I think if you need that printed map and you're, way up on French Pass, then you probably shouldn't be way up French Pass. So, in that situation, I think one of the smaller ones would be better. But I think, I think I'd be okay with the kiosk B in some of the front mid-country. I mean, obviously just always thinking about B&B and mini mine and how many intersections there are. I do think it is very easy to get lost within a mile of your car. So I do appreciate that.
I think it's important that these, I said this earlier, that this is a toolbox.
Yeah.
Right? So you get to each situation. There's not a one size fits all, or just because we showed it, you have to do it. It's like there's a small, medium, or a large, medium, small, nothing.
Yep.
That's like the other option. So you just sort of look at each scenario and work with staff to have those guides, and that'll come out of this, those guidelines as to when should I do it? But at a certain point, as you roll it out, you're going to go to that location and go, do I really need this or not? And then you
Mhm.
decide.
Have you done this in a similar area, like in a different county?
Yeah, I mean, we've done Anchorage trails. We've done, we're currently doing in Pennsylvania, Williamsburg trails. We've done lots of trails projects.
Curious if there's some we could reference.
Important part of this as we move forward, Kristen, I think is developing that feeling or understanding of how you guys feel and we feel,
Mhm.
because as staff, we will move forward and we would like to install signs thinking like, this is how I think we're on the right track. And all of a sudden we've got a mini kiosk somewhere.
Yeah.
And now you guys are upset and, then we're like, oh God, we have to check with BOSAC before
Tony.
we put in, a single post.
Yeah.
I think that's something with this plan, having all these options, developing that
Mhm.
relationship with you guys and making sure we're on the right track, the same page.
Yeah. I think to that end, if we're leaning towards, once you get into the mid and back country, having the smaller posts, I think that what that means is like you eliminate the map, but you still can have the distance in a lot of places. And I think that's really great. I think having like the 0.3, but I also just have questions about how that works because there are so many intersections. So how do you decide? I just think just like the logistics of that, I want to make sure that if we go that route, no pun intended, that we're not relying on Tony to do, it just seems like there could be, again, thinking of mini mine, like you could do 0.3 miles to 7 different trails in that little tiny section. And so I'm just kind of curious to learn a little bit more about how you work through that process.
I mean, one of the other things that and I forgot to mention, it wasn't on the slides, is that in certain cases, you also just want to have like a landmark orientation device that you're directing to, whether that's,
Mhm.
The Nordic Center or downtown or whatever it might be, that just gives people sort of an understanding of where they are, that they just may want to get back to something or go the opposite way.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, and then the final thing I will say is, we've talked a lot about wanting to do loops. And I know maybe still some other comments, but, I think this is still a really good opportunity to see just, during dinner, we were looking up like the classic Breckenridge loop on mountain bike project, which a lot of people do when they come to town. Like, are there some loops we can use this signage plan to help memorialize? And could they be semi-permanent if we don't want to use that loop forever? If we want to test a loop, is there a way to incorporate kind of what your Breck loop was, and not necessarily just an urban one, but a mountain biking one or a hiking only one or something, that we can use that's semi-permanent, that our staff can easily put up and say, follow red if you're doing the classic Breck route. And then if
Or
we
the
want to
wel-
adjust it, we can.
The Welcome Center would love that.
Yeah, okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Matt, what are you thinking down there?
I agree with most of, if not all of everything that you all said, so thank you very much. And John, I think this is a great response to the last time you were here, to like listen to everybody and just sort of start to pare things down. And, I feel like I've sort of advocated for less and more subtle. Sorry. And I mean, I even think, I feel like I said, like as far out as the back country, like maybe the sign is, if you don't need it, you don't even notice it's there. And I don't know how you get that far. But I do agree. Like, I think it's going to be very challenging to figure out where all this stuff goes and how much at each of these locations as you move further and further away from town. And then I sort of also try and remember my interaction with people, or, being places where I'm unfamiliar, and how important it is to be able to provide them that information. So like the balance of being able to provide enough information, but not too much. And, urban was such a great word that you guys used to kind of describe it. And I couldn't really put my finger on it, but I think that was it. And I think there's just the opportunity to make it more subtle, just like you, Jay-Z. I think, the content is way better. I think there's still room to kind of pare that down a little bit, like the trail specifications or however that's worded on those, a paragraph on there, like that kind of falls into the, like, how much information do we really, I think it's okay too, to put some kind of onus back on the user to be a bit prepared. And that may be naive thinking that that's going to happen. But hopefully it's,
We've tried to include is like the high level of information because you can always delete, right? So you have the sign panel, the size, and it's easy to take information off and make it bigger. It's much harder to say, okay, we've established this. Oh, but wait a minute, we need to include 3 other things. So we've gotten it to the max.
yeah.
It's not to say that the max is always needed. If it is, it's taken care of, but then after that, you can pare it down.
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to determine that.
Yeah, and I think maybe with the exception of the most busy trailheads like B&B or Sally Barber, where those big kiosks already exist, it almost feels like, front country, mid-country, back country could all get, everything could get notched back one stage. And, maybe that would kind of help get to that less cluttered feeling that I kind of get when I look at these renderings, and I'm not very good at seeing through color or content, but that was just kind of how I felt about the whole thing. So, yeah, I think it's a great kind of response to that last meeting. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And the last thing, I like the dotted line map rather than the one that looked like roads. So, but I thought it was better. And then if there's recommended routes too, then those dots can be those colors too. So thank you.
David, let's hear all your notes here. We got written down.
This is my shopping list.
Oh, okay. My mistake.
No, thank you. I think I also really appreciate all the comments that have come in so far, because I think a lot of this is really informative. Paul, your word urban really did sort of kind of capture the way this feels right now. And then I'm trying to think about how this might look in the wild versus kind of on a white background where it does really, really pop. I know that one of the things that we had talked about with the current posts is that they can get lost in the, particularly, I guess, in the summertime more than the winter. You don't always see them. So I think that was kind of the idea with some kind of mark on the top. But I wanted to kind of stay away from kind of the actual design nits and maybe think about particularly to what Matt had said, taking everything back once you guys execute on this and understand you're getting the kit of parts. The user groups are always the biggest struggle for me. And I think the heartburn I've always had was the easy, moderate, and difficult trails. All of our trails are in this blue zone, but they are not all the same. And I've been beating the drum for some kind of a profile that I've seen in other trail systems where they have the angle so you can see that this is going to be a trail with a lot of elevation gain instead of the feet. Because I think Laura, you're right. The elevation gain is, I've been here a long time. I still can't calculate what a 200-foot elevation gain is. So that's just a usability thing. Less is more in my mind. I think when we were looking at the backcountry, it was so heavy on regulatory. And I know you guys will kind of think about this, but I would like to see maybe the handoff to the Forest Service's Carcinite signs. If there's just an element that is just a sticker on there like there are now, there's some county logos on those Carcinite signs, but just maybe if there was maybe one little bit of color on there or something, but I'd rather limit it to that than having lots of regulatory signs, because I think if you've made it all the way to the backcountry, the trail or your map or watch or whatever is going to be your guide. back to mid-country and front country. I really like Illinois Gulch as the test. I think that's a great way to, because that system or that little mini system feels that it's encapsulated because you can kind of loop everything back. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this approach works with the public. I don't love the map that's just in black because I don't know that it's as useful to see the profile of the trail or how difficult it is. But then again, I think of the folks that I've run into on Betty's Trail in my neighborhood, and 2 switchbacks up, and there's a couple that's lost and they're holding their phone asking how they can get down, and like, it's right there. Like, see all the lights, that's where you're going. But I do think that people don't know, should we just bushwhack it down because we're completely lost? How far is it going to take us to go these switchbacks to get down to the road? So I think that is really it. I do like the kind of getting into the technology part. If the QR codes are in more places than they aren't, at least in the front and mid-country, those kiosk signs, the trailheads are really going to be what our visitors tend to see. I don't love the mile markers. I'll be honest with you. Seeing the map of where they would go on side door just sort of puts me to the point where I'm like, that's too much. It's once I'm done, I want to enjoy nature and I want to enjoy my ride. Otherwise, with my declining talents, I'll probably run right into them or catch my handlebar on them. So anyway, I know it's happening. It's happening. So that's it. Nice job, though. I've been to a couple of your design open houses, and I know you've taken in a lot of groups, and they all want something different. And I think you did a really nice job capturing what we like about our current signage system, and where we want to and need to head in the future. So thank you.
Wanna go, Chris? Or you can pick someone else.
Oh, we have that rule? No, I'll go.
Sure.
Just get it over with. John, thanks again. Definitely heard what we were saying before. My notes, same as always, kind of start with do less. I think that, like everybody's been saying, about 30% less color, less information would probably be where we want to land. But understand that this is just our toolbox. I think that's a great place to start. It's gonna be great for staff because then they can figure out the different scenarios and have a tool available to them. I'm kind of more curious about the testing phase when we start taking on at the staff level out in the field, and try to figure out how we can be more deliberate in that, like what we're measuring for and what we're testing for, and since everybody's kind of leaning towards the more of a minimalistic kind of vantage locally, which I think all of us would appreciate, but we're not just doing this for the local crew, we're also doing it for the visitors. I'd really love to see that test kind of have a min max kind of set. So it's like, we have one part of the test that's like, okay, here's all the information that you could ever use. And then somehow measure that if that's too much, but then also have a minimal version where it's just kind of the brand standards and it looks and feels like the rest of the trail system, but it's not over the top as far as the max information that'd be available. But yeah, other than that, I like it. I still don't quite get the trail difficulty. It's so arbitrary. I don't know how we could ever really land on that. It's a tricky one, but that one. And then I was also curious too, I don't know where in the conversation came up the whole emergency locator scenario. I don't even know who would run that.
We're gonna have phones, right? Landline.
Our docents are gonna go give them a Band-Aid. How does that work?
We asked about that too. I think, like everything else, John just put that in there as an option, but
Yeah.
I'll share my opinion. If you use your phone to call 911, they know where you are.
Good luck. Okay, thank you guys.
Probably to nobody's surprise, I look at it a little bit differently once you get away from the original trailhead. I don't really care too much about any of the information except that I'm on the trail I thought I was. So a lot of that, as far as I'm concerned, could go away, but I want to know that when I come to a fork in the road, I want to be on the left fork, not the right. That's the basic information that's needed. And a lot of this other stuff is nice, but if we're trying to keep the clutter down, let's just make it so that it's obvious
at an intersection that I would need to go this way instead of that way. Because if I go that way, an hour and a half later, I'm going to realize that I'm not where I thought I was and I'm walking. So it's going to take me a long time to get back to where I started. So it's really that piece of information that I think is the most critical once you get away from the trailhead. We can put a lot of this really good stuff at the trailhead to give a lot of information, but when we get further out, let's just tell them the basic. Trail A is this way, trail B is that way. And that's the main thing I would love to see, and I would like to see it throughout our system as much as we could, because we do have a lot of people who've only lived here, you know, like me, 4 or 5 years full time, or who are just coming every summer, but they don't know the trail system. And when there's a lot of splits in the trail system, they get a little frustrated because they are not going where they had hoped to go. Now they may find something wonderful where they went when they went the wrong way. I've done that too. And I thought, oh, I'm glad I didn't do what I was planning on doing. But when you do need to know where you are, I think it's just really basic information that becomes a lot less cluttered and a lot less intrusive. I would like to have the trailhead itself have some of the depth of information that we've got here, because I think that's our opportunity to help them understand what the etiquette is here and what they're likely to experience, and all that can make for a richer experience and hopefully a better experience if they really do understand we want them to pick up their dog poop. But I like the designs. I think we've got some good things going. The blue cap is a little bit troubling, not so much because it's bright, but because blue means something.
That's a good
Right.
point.
It's a blaze.
That's a good.
Yeah, we've gone back and forth as to what the color you would use there to not cause confusion either for difficulty or color coded trail but at the same time, we heard last time, make it a little bit more creative, a little bit bolder. There's a balance that we're trying to, so again, color, we can solve.
Thank you.
John, I really appreciate, I think everyone can see from some of the previous iterations how far this has come and how much input that you've taken in and revised, and really appreciate the county being involved, and, you guys are our partners, and that's something we've stressed from the get-go. I do find that iBeacon, technology piece intriguing down the road. I think that could be the answer to minimalism and to really getting, losing a bunch of signage is by having some of those smaller technology pieces down the road at some point. But I think everyone's input, I think it's all been very valuable and very well-founded, and some really, really great feedback. I was happy to see that the 8x8 posts aren't the ones that are going to be strewn everywhere, that those are just another kiosk option, which I think makes a lot of sense for providing more information and seeing the 6x6s live on throughout, the rest of the trail system. And really looking forward to seeing what the test phase looks like and kind of how the plan develops of a prescriptive when this, do that kind of standpoint. And I think that's where the devil lays in the details, right, if you will. And so I think it's great work, and really, I think all the feedback here has been very, very productive. So thank you.
Thanks, Jay. John, I'll just echo, thanks for all your work, and OSAC, great to hear from you, and you bring some good perspective that we hadn't even heard before. I just had a few things I wanted to reiterate. Kristen's mentioning of the loops. We did, designated loops were spoken to in our master plan, and I know it's not easy to figure out how to do it, but I think now is the time while we're doing this work to figure out how do we integrate the designated loops into the design. I love the blue cap. Frankly, I love the design element of the topo. I understand, Bobby, that's a great point about the color.
Is that an approval?
Yes, I fully endorse it. I love, John, I think just from the design perspective, integrating a little more of the blue into the content, like it to me seems like an outlier as it's only on the cap, but I think if you had some subtle blue accents into the actual design, it would incorporate it better. I wonder if like a sort of a less saturated purple could be a nice option, like a grayish purple. Catherine, did you say that?
Yeah, I love purple.
Purple is a lovely color. I don't think it's, yeah, well, that's true. I mean, that's true. You could go hot pink. That would be
Yeah.
brazen.
Yep.
Okay. Catherine and I are on the same wavelength. So, but I think actually, David, you said you thought it worked well in the summer. I think it works quite well in this winter. I think the wayfinding is helpful in the winter. I think sometimes the signage gets absorbed into the natural environment. So I'm a big fan. I wondered, John, in terms of the kiosks, when we need to change out maps, when things become outdated, is that thought through in terms of how these are somewhat temporary? How does that work?
So everyone has to realize as you get into the kiosks, and specifically the information at the trailhead sign, not the big kiosk, but the trailhead sign, is all that information, like the more information you want and the more customized you want it, the more work is required for that, right? So if you want a map at that trailhead, on all those poles, someone has to draw it, right? And then hopefully you'd come up with a standard for that. I would leave the map at that level to really a high level of landmark orientation information so that it's not something that would get changed a lot. You know, you wouldn't get into the detail that you would see like in a downtown where things sort of churn through it and change. I think you would just have really high level information that's going to rely on not being updated very often. But I mean, you don't want something that has to update every year. You want something that wants to update every 5 to 10 years. I think if you kept it at landmark high level, you would be fine. But yes, you're going to have a drawing for each of those kiosks, you know, depending upon how far out you want it to go. But that was a request in the last meetings where, oh, on the kiosk, we should have on the big kiosk, sort of a regional, sort of bigger view of the system, and then also have a detail map, right? And then also have a detail map at the trailhead. So all that would have to be developed as you go forward.
Yeah. I agree with David. I don't love the mile markers, just throwing that out there. I think there's major implications for keeping that updated. Anytime you added a trail or amended a trail, you'd have to update that. I think it adds confusion. And I think it's hand holding the user more than we need to. That's just my take. I was thinking a lot about David's comment about showing the trail profile. Laura, that's a great comment about elevation gain being lost on most people, or it's not really helping anybody or most people. But I wonder if in certain cases, to John's point about this being a toolbox and we're having to curate, or these are bespoke signs for certain areas, if with trails such as Backdoor or Mineral Hill / Hiker's Gold, Little Mountain, where say they're big climbs, I think that would be nice to tell a user like, hey, you're going up Backdoor. It's like a hefty, long, arduous climb. So I think in those circumstances, it would be nice to have that type of information if that were possible. And then lastly, just one more design element. I think, John, where you have the trail difficulty, it's not on this slide, but on, I'm trying to think where I saw it. There was a white band where you have the difficulty. I'll tell you if I see it. If you can, oh, okay, go back. Go back again. There we are. So the typical trail, all persons trail, the moderate is, in my mind, I think it gets lost in that white negative space. I don't really see it, and I'm worried.
We looked at that a bunch. I'm laughing. We
Okay.
looked at it a bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
We ended up settling on on that.
Yeah, that's just my sense is I think it gets lost. And then the brown and green colorway, I fear is like a little too analogous to the Forest Service. I loved, speaking of the purple, full circle with the purple, when you had the special colorway for Cucumber Gulch Preserve in one of your previous iterations. I thought that colored way was really nice. It was like a lighter green and a darker green and a purple. And I know I'm getting very granular, but I thought that was a really nice way to handle the colors. So just throwing that out there. I think it's preferential to the brown personally.
I'd also say that I'm going to leave these full-size mock-ups, with Duke and Tony and Alex. Take them outside because things shrink. Even something that small, it shrinks. And it might feel, I'm always hesitant to show full-size mock-ups, even something like this big inside because it feels big, but you take it outside and it goes down tremendously. We always do it because we're always just not sure. So you take it outside and you take a look at it.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Staff, do you have any other thoughts, feelings?
No, this was a great batch of feedback. Appreciate everyone's engagement on this. It's been a good process, and that's all I have.
Great.
Question. So if we're talking about criteria, just kind of full circle, having heard all of this feedback and kind of understanding the difference between what's merges and what's the town's responsibility. If we're talking about the distance, or we're talking about where we want to put the kiosks and what our criteria is for that. And if we want to do distance to town or distance to a landmark, is that stuff that would happen later on? And then we would have, maybe that would just be a new agenda item for us to determine with you.
Yeah, I think one of the discussion questions we put in there is, how does BOSAC feel about revisiting this in April? We'll have the final deliverables, and then maybe we could get a little more granular and like, how do we want to do this in our test phase? Some of Chris's ideas maybe, and then from that, start to develop this algorithm that Jay referred to,
Yeah.
but sort of.
And we will help put that together.
Okay.
With staff, and just come to an agreement. Okay, this is where we think it should be, and then that'll go to you for review.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
John, do they need, as far as editing, is that based on like Illustrator? What type of design software?
Maps are going to be Illustrator.
Yeah.
All the panels are Illustrator. It's all mostly Illustrator.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Great.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
I could have one more comment. After,
Yeah.
listening through this, signage plans, you kind of got a tiger by the tail, right? You got design, you got implementation, then you got maintenance long term. And so unfortunately, I kind of go logistics quickly. So I'd urge to really focus on how Tony and his team actually inventory, manage, maintain, make it lasting. So I think Jay said devil's in the details. Well, that's really important detail. I think really important detail of how Tony's team and town's going to see this over the years. So just bear that in mind. You can get kind of lost between Tony were to go away, right? Who's next, right?
And it's hard to tell with Tony because he's always cool as a cucumber. So we never know when he's actually stressed out.
That's the thing. Anyway, sorry.
No, great thought. John, good luck at town council tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's all been extremely helpful. I think the comments are awesome, and you can see it, right? It gets easier and better.
Yes.
Each time. It's not something you just go like that and, you don't Google it and you get the answer. You have to sort of work through that design process. So I appreciate everybody's
Yeah.
comments.
Absolutely. So we'll move on to our Camp Hale Continental Divide National Monument discussion.
Browser. Here. Alex, that's queued up on the browser, right?
Yes, it is. Go to your browser first. There you go. Hit escape.
It's gonna be there.
Top right if you want.
That it's the gradual loss of a memory or a cultural attribute that was important at that time.
There you go.
They don't apply to it. And next thing you know, nobody ever can say.
Why do
So
always,
the idea of.
people, it's like
right on.
It's like design 101 where everything's like.
Yours?
Right, I'm just gonna give a couple kind of general overview, kind of comments on the documents that were in your packet and this process. Then I'm gonna turn it over to Jordan, who has some slides that go into more detail on both the access plan and the management framework. But just for context, I wanted to point out that both of these plans, so we're gonna talk about the access plan, which is what you guys saw at your meeting last month. We're gonna talk about that a little bit again. And then we're also gonna talk about this management framework. And I just want to kind of set the tone by saying that both of these documents are really intended to be visioning documents, right? Think of these as almost like master plans where we're collecting everyone's feedback. We're brainstorming what we think some good alternatives are. We're using all that feedback to then fine tune those alternatives. And we're hoping we're putting forth what we think are the best ideas at the time, but we're not binding ourselves currently. We're not committing ourselves to do any one specific thing or, pointing to Town of Breckenridge or to the Forest Service and saying, you will do X and it will, we're just trying to get a handle on how we better manage this area and what our options are for doing that. We know there's a lot of uncertainty, for the Forest Service with a brand new administration at the federal level. We know there's uncertainty with our own elected officials, and they may decide they want to do some of this. They may decide they want to do none of this. So really think about this as kind of a master planning process. And then our contract with Volpe ends in February. So we're trying to get as much feedback as we can from you all while we still have them working with us. But we also envision that you will have other opportunities to comment on this stuff beyond when they give us some draft documents that incorporate the feedback we're going to talk about tonight. What else? And then I think another really important part is that everything about this is intended to be adapted. So the implementation part of this is we're learning a little bit as we go. We have all these ideas that we're outlining and we're thinking about at this point in the game, but then we're not necessarily going to roll all that out at once, right? We're going to try some of these things in a phased kind of way. We're going to see what's working, what's not working, and then implement these things in kind of a adaptive way and not having to build some of the things you see on here right at the outset. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Jordan and let him go through the access plan first and some other details.
Great.
Thanks, Catherine. So our agenda, we're going to look at the access plan updates. These are updates based on the feedback we heard from BOSAC and OSAC during your previous reviews of the access plan, as well as some of the feedback that we got from our partners, especially nonprofit partners at Colorado 14ers Initiative, Summit Huts, FDRD, and the Breckenridge Tourism Office. And then I'm going to go into kind of a document that will be the first time that this group is seeing, which is the management framework. This is outlining kind of whose responsibility are some of these things going to be, what are our options for assigning responsibility and making sure that this works into the future. So we're going to talk about guiding principles, kind of just what are those philosophies for managing this area, the different management scenarios that we have outlined that would be possible in this area. And then really quickly, I'm going to go through some staffing needs and funding sources that were identified by Volpe, just to kind of show you the types of details we're trying to think about through this process. just quickly looking at, again, the project area to bring it to the top of our minds, we're looking at the southern part of the 10-mile range, and that's everything from the Spruce Creek trailhead, McCullough Gulch, the upper McCullough Gulch trailhead primarily, Quandary, and Blue Lakes. So that's the scope of this project. And then just some of those key objectives. We want to reduce our traffic and parking impacts on our residents and neighbors. Balancing this increased visitation with sustainable management. So looking out for our environment, the financial sustainability of this program, and otherwise. And I think this is an important one, creating the appropriate level of amenities, right size for the anticipated level of visitation. So there's high demand in this area. We know that. We want to make sure that people can visit this area and not be causing excessive damage on our resources, whether that's our road infrastructure, our trailheads, or our water and natural resources. Coordinating with our equitable access, that's going to be an important one I'll touch on more later. Coordinating with our partners at the Forest Service. This has been a great process for us to learn more about working with them and just have a lot of that one-on-one interaction. And then maintaining emergency access, I think, has always been a priority in this area. It was one of the reasons that Quandary shuttle and parking system was initiated. In two worlds here. Okay, so the big overarching general updates to the access plan, you're also going to see these themes represented in our management framework principles, our increased emphasis on sustainable and equitable access that meets the demand. So that's something we talked about very specifically with OSAC, and Sam Masman put it really well. I thought that, there's a high demand in these areas, and if we don't facilitate that demand in these places, then we're almost certainly going to see that displacement and those impacts just pushed to other areas. And that's another reason we took on this project, because the Quandary's parking and shuttle works really well for Quandary, but where are the other places that now I could access without, as much red tape potentially? So that's important. And then adding language about protecting our sensitive habitats and avoiding undisturbed areas. This is a really unique environment. This is one of the reasons that this national monument was dedicated in this area, for the unique alpine environment. That's what people want to see and get to, but we also need to be conscious of preserving those environments. Specifically to Quandary, we updated that part of the plan to include oversized vehicles. We hear a lot from school groups, potentially folks with RVs who want to be able to park up there. So providing that access for those types, and also that encourages people to be going in larger groups potentially, which from a sustainability standpoint is good. And then including Colorado 14ers initiative in the signage design for Quandary, then that will help ensure consistent trailhead information for hiking 14ers. And that was specifically requested by CFI to just ensure that consistency at different 14ers across the state. Talked about better signage on Blue Lakes Road. So making sure people know that this is a steep and rough road and that it's advantageous to have a capable vehicle. I think this is a really important one that comes up at other locations as well, as there are spur roads, kind of those lower lake roads that have mixed ownership. There's a lot of camping and kind of parking in this riparian ecosystem. It's not very sustainable. It's hard to manage because of the mixed jurisdiction. So looking at those roads for potential closures to vehicular traffic, kind of make a better experience. And CFI also mentioned that another justification for a potential trail connection between the Blue Lakes trailhead and the Quandary trailhead is to make for a safer and better experience for folks who wanted to hike up the west ridge of Quandary, which is a more technical climb, and then to be able to descend the east ridge without needing to walk on that shared road, a part of Blue Lakes Road where there's vehicles. And apparently there's been a lot of search and rescue calls from people who are descending the west ridge. And so this would hopefully encourage those people to be able to make a loop, and not something we would advertise. Obviously West Ridge is for people who, know what they're doing and can put their own route together. And so, but that was just additional justification for that. Moving on to McCullough Gulch. This was something that Sam had emphasized, which was justifying formalizing some parking near the trailhead. Two reasons that I think that's really important is for shoulder season access. There's one of the most frequent calls we get from people is the shuttle season has ended. Can I go to the end of McCullough Gulch Road and park? And they'll answered right now is no. And so hopefully we can, maybe with a free reservation or something, provide that shoulder season access closer to the trailhead. And that actually cuts off 1.5 miles of hiking from that experience where people want to get into the alpine environment. And it's pretty relatively short access. And this comes up again. There's obviously those spur roads in the McCullough Gulch area, and there's those new dispersed camping sites along McCullough Gulch Road. So through this process, looking at those amenities on Forest Service land, through the NEPA process, is there a different way to manage those campsites if needed in the future, if those just become de facto, free parking in this area? And we know we've also had lots of search and rescue sheriff's office calls for people in the off seasons going down those spur roads, looking for that McCullough Gulch access and becoming totally stuck on because those roads tend to ice up early in the season. And finally, for Spruce Creek, Greg reviewed the plan from the kind of Summit Huts perspective and thought it was important that we make sure we are dedicating spaces for overnight hut users in any new increased parking at Spruce Creek. And for backpackers as well. I spent a good amount of time at the Spruce Creek Trailhead this summer counting cars. And one of the things I noticed was that a lot of those cars were there on obvious overnight trips. And so we want to make sure we're accommodating that access here as well. And then once again, beyond the trailhead, when you go past the Spruce Creek Trailhead, that's a through route. People go past the trailhead. We want to be able to adaptively manage the campsites and those informal parking areas that are past the trailhead, so that they're not, again, becoming just de facto free parking if we were to implement a reservation system or shuttle in this area. I'm going to go into the management framework now. Again, we're going to talk about these kind of guiding principles. I'll walk through those. Then we're going to talk about some management scenarios that would allow for potentially single entity management so that this is a seamless system. People aren't confused about how and when and who to contact about what resources. The first two here, I'm not going to read every word of these, and I don't encourage you to necessarily try to do that while I'm talking, but the first two are the management is adaptive and collaborative. So we're always looking at what we're doing. I think Quandary is a great example of this. We've changed shuttle types, we've changed shuttle frequencies, we've changed parking prices, trying to reach some level of financial and program stability and sustainability. Again, management actions, providing trail and infrastructure that accommodate that high use, but also protect natural resources, which was something that we also emphasized further in the access plan. And then I think this was a big one, free economical visitor access. So equitable from that equity side. How can we provide potentially free shuttles and make it so that the parking can potentially help us pay for and provide free shuttles to these areas? Next was just kind of stating that whoever owns the land should basically be in charge of the infrastructure on their properties. Moving to, there's a lot of these, so take notes. The Forest Service is kind of in our vision right now from speaking with our partners there, in charge of the trails, the camping, the backcountry experience, whereas town and county kind of take the lead on providing that access from the front country to the back country. This includes Forest Service leading trail implementation and improvements to really facilitate that access and protect the resource. County leading the shuttle contracts, just like what we're doing at Quandary. Well, we thought this was very important that the town is providing parking for those shuttle customers, because right now the Quandary shuttle does not work unless we have a place to put those visitors in Breckenridge, and the same would be true of a Spruce Creek shuttle. And so we just want to make sure we're assessing that availability and that demand over time, and that we can provide it. And then finally, creating a self-sustaining system and a seamless management that is consolidated, so that it's either the town or the county or the Forest Service potentially managing these resources so that, again, people know where to go for information and then it's all in one place and it's a one-stop shop rather than making reservations with different entities across different platforms for different locations. And that's just to make it easier for our visitors. Okay, so I'm going to go into some management scenarios now. These are mostly ways that we looked at for how do we charge fees and bring those fees into the system and help them sustain the system, especially on federal lands. We've got a pretty good system right now on our town and county lands through the quandary system, but we want to look at how we're integrating those potentially those federal lands, Spruce Creek and McCullough Gulch and the dispersed campsites, all of that. So the first scenario that we looked at was the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act. Think Vail Pass Winter Rec. That's like the number one example I think that a lot of people are familiar with. Hanging Lake's another example where we're providing certain amenities and we're able to then recoup some fees and charge for access. The cons there are the time. Really takes a while to implement something like this at the federal level. The fees have to go through an advisory board, so it's less adaptive. We can't just like from one year to the next necessarily change the fees to try to make this a more sustainable system. And then staffing. Forest Service would need to hire more staff to manage this area, as we know that in our current environment that might not always be possible. When we looked at a concessionaire, so those are like our campgrounds in Summit County are all under concessionaire agreements. A third party private company is running those systems. Again, time to implement is longer. It takes a year or more to do a prospectus and basically put out a nationwide bidding process for a private company to look at these areas and decide how much, if they can make a profitable business out of it. The revenues don't stay local, so the concessionaire really is keeping those. They can do maintenance in the area in lieu of their fees, but they're also setting those fees. And so that takes some of the control out of our hands as the partners in this area as the town, county, and Forest Service. So we have a little less control over how much it costs for people to access these areas in this scenario. And the real pro here is the staffing. We don't have to, as the town, county, or Forest Service, have more staff in order to manage these areas. And then finally, would be a special use permit to a local government. And so that would be like what we have for the Golden Horseshoe, which is actually a special use authorization, which is not as broad. So that's just for trail and road management. And the Frisco Peninsula is probably like the most top of the head example where they are setting the fees. They run that Nordic Center. They're in charge of, access and all of those things that go into it. Ski areas are another special use permit holder. So the pros here are the time. There's no prospectus required. The federal government can issue a local government a special use permit without doing that process. The revenues stay local. So as a special use permit, the town or county or jointly, we would bring those revenues in and be able to use them to perform maintenance and to fund the program. And we would have more control over those fees. So that would be something that the permit holder would be able to. And again, the con here is the staffing. We would, as the permit holders, need to hire the staff to manage that permit and we'll look at a staffing table here in just a moment. So recommendations from Volpe after we looked at these scenarios all together was to start with a special use permit issued to the county. And that would be to manage mostly the Spruce Creek and McCullough Gulch trailheads that are being proposed. And Blue Lakes, in addition to Quandary, which we're obviously already managing. Again, with that goal of bringing this all under one umbrella. And then for the future, to seek this Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act and to potentially, do some kind of land swap with the Forest Service if that was, appropriate in the future to bring that all under back under federal management, because this area is primarily accessing those national forest resources. So those were the recommendations for the short-term and long-term management in this area. And then this is something where we don't need to necessarily focus on the details of, these numbers, but under a special use permit, we need additional county deputies to do enforcement in the area. We need program and permit manager at the county level to oversee our permits. We need shuttle operations, reservation management, private enforcement for those lots. Maintenance contractors for bathrooms and trash and all those other services that we outlined in the plan. And then Forest Service staff at the law enforcement and trail technician level to enhance the trails to create the better wayfinding that we've outlined in the plan as well. And then finally, there's some federal grants outlined in the plan. Most importantly, I'll call the Federal Lands Transportation Program. Our partners at the Forest Service are currently expecting $1 million to kind of get this kicked off and to do some of these enhancements for the trailheads, which was another one of the reasons that we started this process. And then we'd like to see this continue to move forward towards NEPA analysis this year. And then there's obviously our local grants, our non-motorized trails, the Land and Water Conservation Program, as well as GOCO funds, American Trails. So those are just some of the things that we've outlined as potential funding sources. And I'm just breezing through this because I really want to get to kind of next steps and some discussion. So we're going to make more updates to our access plan and management framework based on this conversation. We're going to town council, currently planning to on the 11th for an initial conversation on this at the very least. We have a scheduled Board of County Commissioners on February 18th. And then as Catherine alluded to, Volpe is kind of off the hook. Their contract ends on February 28th, but that does not mean that we necessarily need to stop these conversations or call that a final product. But one thing we'd like to do is have at least this developed enough by this current 2025 working season to allow the Forest Service to begin the NEPA process, because a lot of these things need to be approved that way in order to have any chance of being implemented. So that's the idea, is to look at a scope of what we could do and then move forward from there. And then we'd love to get an endorsement for and a recommendation for BOCC and council endorsement from all of you before really the summer season comes off, and then the NEPA stuff that I talked about earlier. So that's plenty of hearing from me. Now we really want to hear about what you have to say about the access plan, and then those kind of guiding principles and the management scenarios that we talked about. So with that, anything else from?
Yeah. I think that was a great overview. I know we really went quickly through some of the management framework stuff, but I think something important to think about in that regard is that as far as the Forest Service being able to initiate a NEPA review of any of these options, the really fine tuning the access plan and what tools we want in our toolbox to be looking at for how we're going to better manage this area. Refining those options with you all and our elected officials and other stakeholders in the next few months is more important, I would say, than getting all the details of the management framework right. And we'll have time to have discussion about the management framework over the, during the NEPA process and beyond. We don't need to know exactly going into NEPA, hey, we're going to hire a concessionaire to do this spot, and we're going to, we think that's going to cost, we just need to know, we think these are going to be fee-based areas. We think they're going to be these kinds of improvements that we'd like to implement as far as trails and parking and shuttles go in each of these areas. And that's really the information we'd like to prioritize nailing down in the coming months. So that's the only thing I think I wanted to add. Yeah. Certainly would, and Sam, who's and Adam from the Forest Service are here as well. And if you guys have would obviously love for you to add anything that you feel like we left out or your perspective. Really appreciate you guys being here as well.
Having us. I'm Sam Maston of the Recreation Program Manager for the White River National Forest Summit.
Sam, I'm sorry. Can you use the mic just so people watching virtually can hear you? Thank you, Sam.
You might have to press that up.
There we go.
Thank you, Sam.
Hey, everybody, Sam Massman from the White River National Forest, Recreation Program Manager for the forest. And thank you for Jordan and for that presentation, and thanks for having us. And we've been working on this for about a year as a group. And we started by kind of taking a big look at access across the county to the National Forest. Summit County gets around 9 million visits a year. Put that in perspective, that's triple the entire Pike San Isabel National Forest, which runs from Hoosier Pass to Colorado Springs. So we are discovered. We've got a ton of visitation here. And these are some of our most popular areas for people. Listening to your sign discussion, one comment theme that I wanted to throw out there is that I think there's several ways for you to consider how to manage a system of signs or trails or recreational access. And one way is this front country, mid country, back country, geographic, distance from town or distance from services. Another that we're thinking a little bit, I'd say we're incorporating that here, but another way is to look at where are your people going now, or where do you want them to go in the future? And we're so far behind on investing in our trailheads and trails here as visitation has increased, that we're in a scenario where the public has kind of told us where they want to go, and you can see it on the ground if you hike up Spruce Creek Trail, right? Or you go and try and park there sometime. And so we are partly reacting to where we're seeing people want to go, and we're trying to meet their needs a little bit. And we're partly trying to look forward at anticipated continued interest and increase in outdoor recreation here. And think a little bit broader than a singular trailhead, but enough to be like, hey, do we know where people want to go? We know where can we provide facilities to manage them sustainably, intentionally at these points, so that we don't continue the scenario that we have now, where they show us where they want to go, and we don't increase our services accordingly, or we don't provide that somewhere. So that's all I'll add. And I can grab the mic, I'll just bring it over here, and when you have questions.
Thanks, Sam. Who's got a thought?
I think it could be related to the discussion questions that are up there, or, I mean, obviously we'd love to get some feedback on those, but if it's something totally different, we can go there too if time allows, but.
Question, sort of in the very beginning of this process, we're talking a lot about NEPA, but hadn't we been told just recently that NEPA is not happening? They are so overwhelmed and they don't have all the ologists that they need. Are we planning on doing this? And then whenever they finally get ready, we can submit to NEPA?
How about, let me take that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes, it's true that there are more demands than we have capacity for every project, but this one is one of a few that's made our forest priority list. And part of that is due to this kind of partnership commitment that we've all been made to work together on this. And another is in recognition that in Summit County, we have the highest concentration of visitation on national forest in the country, basically. And we have not put in a bathroom at a trailhead, for just some of this basic stuff to manage it sustainably has risen up high enough that we're taking on. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Bianchi. I'm the district ranger here. The other piece I would add to that is that, we're at a point that historically the forest has taken a stance that if you build something, you build the bathroom, you build the parking lot, that brings people. We wanted to keep it pretty primitive. I don't think necessarily today, when you look at stuff, that is the case. They're coming whether we build something there or not. Again, that's not appropriate everywhere across the county, right? Like, we understand that, but there are places, to Sam's point, of they will show us where they want to go. And I think we need to figure out a way to meet that need. But it is important to us from a NEPA perspective that it is a priority. We've got a lot of different projects that entities come to us on that we have to work on, whether that's Excel Energy needing a new power line to ski area one to upgrade lifts. There's a lot there, but we have to also realize that there's certain things we have to keep into our program of work to allow us still to meet the general need of the public, not just always reacting, I think, to what others need of the forest. So we believe that we can do this work, this NEPA work, even with our limited staff. We've got mandate that this we assume will be fall into the EA category, the environmental analysis category, which is sort of the mid-level of analysis. And we have a mandate that we have to do it, you know, once we start that process, it takes a year for us to complete. So that is sort of the time frame when we start it. Now, in the NEPA process, it's kind of like a triangle. On the left-hand side of the triangle is like what we're doing here today. We haven't kicked anything off. We're doing a lot of this ability of getting in front of you all, getting ideas, fleshing out ideas. So this is a part of the NEPA process, just not officially kicked it off. So this is why we're engaging with you all. We're pseudo into it, right? This is part of it, is us to flesh out the ideas, the alternatives, get the feedback, so that when we go full into NEPA, we've got something that the communities can react to in a way. There's enough sideboards there that it isn't open-ended, that then it doesn't become useful because there's so many options and ideas and feedback that we get. So that's sort of what the intent is, a lot of this for us.
I find the option of creating an SUP pretty intriguing. I'm not sure I've heard that yet. Missed it, but that's a fascinating avenue to go down. Or about that as an option. What that would be. Boy, I'll tell you, it sure resonates with me. There's a lot of nuance behind that, so it's something to really dig into, I think. But face value, it seems a pretty robust way to go about it.
I'll tee off of what Jeff just said. Adam already knows what I'm gonna say. We're taking a specific area of the county right now, the upper blue, where we're seeing all this stuff hit us all at once. I shouldn't say all at once. It's been happening for the last 30 years. But now we have to deal with it. Where's the next one? Next one is already there. It's Vail Pass. I mean, we've got a nonprofit organization up there that's trying to do the management of the area based on the same legislation that could be applied here, that being the Recreation Enhancement Act, the fee collected by the users to manage the backcountry. In this case, up there, it's for winter recreation. And there's a lot of things positive and negative that go in there. So the idea of a special use permit, let's go outside the bubble here. Is it not only here, but it's also strategic locations throughout Summit County. And it may be that that's going to happen in 10 years from now, 5 years or whatever. But I think we ought to be looking at long-term in the future. And as the county then I shouldn't say the county, it's all of us. It could be a partnership between Breckenridge and the county, as you're doing in the Golden Horseshoe. But it's where does the local community step forward to take on the management of public lands that our feds can't handle? Comment?
I have a quick, Sam or Adam, in an SU, does it creating an SUP change the level of environmental review? Does it change it to a EA? Reduce it to a lower level, CE or something like that? How does that affect? For the horse, and just.
Sure. It wouldn't necessarily change the level of analysis, but we would want to identify it in the analysis that it is a tool we would want to potentially use, so that the public is aware that it may be another entity, a concessionaire, local government that could take on management. So we would want to identify it, but it wouldn't necessarily kick it into a higher level of analysis.
And I bring that up because the more complexity, nuance, there's more time spent in the process.
And I'd add to that, you know, when Catherine mentioned we would have a little more time on the management framework, that's the specifics of who's doing what with reservations and fees and shuttles. So for the public's purposes, we need to disclose that we're going to have reservations and fees and shuttles, and we can talk about these different tools, being a special use permit versus a Forest Service fee versus a concessionaire. But as long as we're disclosing that we're going to manage it that way via one of these three tools, we have time during the, you know, while we're going through NEPA to keep figuring out how we want to, what's the route we want to take.
I have a question about just the National Monument. If this were to go, if the National Monument were to go away because of the back and forth that seems to happen between administrations, would this continue? Would you guys still find this project, especially, you know, trailheads like Spruce Creek? I mean, it seems to me it would be, but I'm just curious if this planning would kind of continue.
Yeah, I mean, at some level, you think about this project, the Frisco Backyard, they're both thoughts that we've had prior to the monument proclamation. They're still some of the highest use places in the country on national forest. And so, yeah, the monument we hoped and hope is being opportunistic for a way for us to help gain support and maybe even funds to do stuff like this, because it raised the profile of the area. But we're reacting to this, like Paul said, these kind of decades of growth and visitation.
And I would just add to that, I think that just going back to the point of when we don't manage these areas for the level of use that we're seeing, the people are still here and they're just going to go somewhere else where we haven't planned for them, and we haven't hardened trail surfaces, and we haven't put in a bathroom, or we, you know, haven't figured out how to accommodate where they want to park. And then they're expanding parking onto grass or parking on roads or whatever. And that's a reason why I would argue that we would continue this process regardless, because these impacts are here. It's just, are we just going to move them around to the next place, or are we trying to, you know, look together at where we want people and how we want to accommodate them? And that ties into the larger recreation access management initiative study that Volpe is also working on. That's the county-wide study that Adam alluded to, where we're studying kind of all the capacity and recreation pressing issues in the county, and also trying to look at that holistically with all of our partners, and just anticipating where the use already is, where it's going to go, and where we want it to be and how we accommodate it.
Yeah, I think, and I would just say, you know, we did our visitor use, collective visitor use data 2 years ago, in 22, and the areas outside of developed areas, so campgrounds, day use areas, ski areas, 170% increase in what we're talking about, right? It's these trailheads. That's where we're seeing the increase. And the reason for that, we believe, is that a lot of these other places, I mean, for any of you, even local folks, have tried to get a campground reservation a couple days prior anywhere in this county is pretty challenging, right? Because they're at max. And so where do people go? They go to these what we call general forest areas, because there isn't the capacity in our current developed spaces where there should be the amenities, right? So we're kind of behind there just by nature of our developed areas are hitting high levels. And so they're going to where they can. And that's these general forest areas we refer to. That's we've seen that increase that Catherine's referring to.
Can you guys think of an example? The one that's kind of giving me the hardest time is the Spruce Creek and the sort of proposed improvements there. And I've seen the crowds there, so I understand that. Can you think of an example of area similar to that and how it's managed? Like, to me, it seems like sending quite a few cars through a residential area, and sort of it feels a little further away because the other trailheads are closer to Highway 9, and I don't know if that affects things. It makes me feel differently about them, but that one in particular, it seems like a lot to happen up there.
looking at the draft proposal.
Yeah, the parking and, I've always felt like we need some vault toilets in a whole lot of different places for sure, and that's probably one of them, so. But I didn't know if there was, it was worth considering a similar situation that you're aware of where there's a better way to get people there without having them bring themselves there.
I mean, the two famous ones on the White River are at the Maroon Bells and at Hanging Lake, which are a little different because they don't go through neighborhoods, you know. But what we've done most recently at Hanging Lake is we did work on a capacity study. So through a capacity study, we considered things like what is the capacity of the parking lot? What is the amount of traffic we can bring in there? What's the capacity of the trail and the resource to handle a volume of people passing each other during the day? One of the things, our stated goals for this project, especially for Spruce Creek, but also for McDill, is to reduce traffic impacts on the neighborhood. And so it's a bit of a balancing act. And I think what we're going to do is come up with a range of ideas of capacities that we could do that can show. Right now on our peak day this past summer, we had somewhere around 500 cars, right? And 1,100 people on the Spruce Creek Trail. And those are the times that, especially for people who live along those roads, that's when we see parking impacts. That's when we see the most trail widening, right? Are these just peak days? And so we're going to look for a capacity that balances still providing access for cars. We can't meet the demand. We know that we can't build that big of a parking lot, and we wouldn't want to. But we're going to look for a capacity that we can say would reduce traffic impacts through the neighborhood by kind of leveling off the peaks and spreading them out over the course of a season. We'd look at the capacity of the trail and do some math on how many groups of people can that trail handle during a day, so that we're planning those two things together, So I think that's our goal with that one, is to actually have some math and disclose to you all the assumptions that go along with it. How do we come to these capacities? But even right now, some of the rough stuff that we've done, I think in our plan, that parking lot ranged from 115 cars to 140 or something like that. Even those are significantly lower than our peak day this past summer, right? And they're in the ballpark. Our average day over the summer was required around 105 car parking lot, I think. So we're going to try to provide enough context that people can see that we've thought through this. It's not an exact science. We have data, we have traffic counters that we've had up for a year, trail counters. We've done parking lot studies, so we know the residency time for people, how often the trailhead turns over. So we think we can come up with something reasonable. But again, with this plan, we need it to be adaptive enough. We need to authorize ourselves enough range that we can have a little trial and error, because maybe we'd find something where we could go a little heavier on the shuttle and lighter on building parking, or vice versa. We needed enough room to kind of figure it out.
Duke or Catherine, could you speak to, regarding Matt's question, how the adaptive process relates to the NEPA application, how you're kind of putting it all out on the table and can dial it back? And I don't know if we've spoken directly to that.
That's really what Sam was just alluding to.
Yeah.
Like they need to, because the NEPA process is extensive, and they don't often have maybe all the resources that they would like to have to analyze, to do the NEPA analysis. They'd like to give themselves the leverage to look at a wider range of options, which is what is in the access plan. But I think at the same time, in our management framework, and internally as staff, we're saying, we're not going to take any of this lightly, right? And we're not going to jump right into building a new 115 space parking lot. We're going to look at what are some of the lowest tech, straightforward solutions we can implement right away. Things like better delineating parking spaces, better delineating the parking lot. So it's clear how the cars are actually supposed to park so that we're maximizing the space that's there. Better wayfinding. So when you are at Spruce Creek, I mean, when you go to Spruce Creek, it's like not even clear where the trail actually is, you know, like, so some basic wayfinding. Well, then maybe we're still having all the crowding issues we were having before. Okay, well, now let's look at, is a shuttle feasible? What would it cost? How often will we have to run it? Do we just need it on peak days or not peak days? Do we need a shuttle plus a little more paid parking to help offset the cost of the shuttle? Well, we've already analyzed that option within our NEPA analysis, so we have the ability to implement that without having to go back to square one and restart that process. Does that help answer your
Yeah,
question?
I think it just gives us, explaining it gives us the option, but we
Mhm.
don't necessarily have to go all in with everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Under NEPA, can they approve parts and reject parts?
So we can, we go out with a proposal, and through public process, they can come up with new alternatives for us, reasons why to do something or not. So as the decision maker, I can then say, we're going to approve this piece of it and not this piece. Or maybe we got to go backwards and relook at and analyze something that we didn't think of before that the public brought to us. So in that time frame, we have many options we can do in order to make sure that we're being most responsive to the comments and to the needs that were presented to us. And then I can make a decision that reflects that.
I wanted to ask about, I said this the last time and I don't think it got answered, and it's maybe because we didn't have the Forest Service folks here, but I still worry about the sustainability and the trail improvements we're going to need for, I mean, we're talking so much about parking and so much about accommodating people coming, and I don't hear any conversation about creating good carrying capacity with the trails. And I know from talking with 14ers Initiative, Quandary's in quite good shape, but when you think about Spruce Creek, I know I've said this before, but Spruce Creek or McCullough Gulch, I mean, those trails are in terrible shape. And I don't understand. It is baffling to me that I don't hear more about what we're going to do about that part.
Well, I think you're right. We have to pair these things together. I don't think we can establish a parking lot, a reservation system, and a shuttle and put that use up there without hardening the trails. You know, we've talked about being intentional with which areas we harden. So the McCullough Gulch and Spruce Creeks, you know, I think what we would probably propose is something like hardening them to those kind of most popular destinations, right? So maybe the waterfall or the first lake in McCullough Gulch, or in Spruce Creek, maybe you'd harden it to the first lake right above the waterfall, you know? So yeah, has to go together. And
I would just say too that our funding is always up in the air from year to year, right? And so we probably don't have a great answer to say, well, like, we know we've got this sustainable, you know, way to put money in. But where it's challenging for us is that we can usually get creative, find funding and grants, or ask for internal funds. No one really wants to pay for the planning, the NEPA. It's relatively, I'm not gonna say easy, but once we have a plan in place, we've got partners, we usually can go after a lot more funding once we have a plan in place, and then that can go to the implementation. So I'm not trying to say we're the government, just trust us, we'll figure out how to way to pay for it. But like at the end of the day, it always is challenging to find those resources. Would not always a great answer, but you know, ideally we would continue, you know, I think Jordan said in there, you know, we were able to at least go after $1 million to start us off. So far, that doesn't go very far, but that's without any planning done with anything. That's just to sort of help with this concept. And so the idea would we'd continue once we did this, we'd continue to put money there where we could. So the other piece is the special use permit piece, the concessionaire piece. Some of those eventually the idea is that you also can grow that to maybe there's a point where the parking and the shuttles or an excess revenue that then maybe some money then does go to the trail maintenance as well, right? So the idea is that you build a little bit of that program that then can generate revenue to go to the full system, not just to the parking or to the shuttles. That would be the ultimate goal, is to make it sustainable through enough revenue if we balance that right.
Sure. I'm just curious why trail improvements aren't included in the access plan. Like they seem like a fairly high dollar consideration and there's nothing in that I see in there about that.
Yeah, good point. I don't know if there's a great answer to that other than we've been really focused on the access. Some of the new trail connections that you see in there. But there's that. There are also probably other things that we haven't fully thought through that would have to happen probably before we go into a NEPA process for the Forest Service. And I'm just thinking things like dispersed camping. We've had some comments on that, but we haven't fully fleshed out like what would we do with that? Maybe Spruce Creek Road past the trailhead or Crystal Creek Road. So I think there's still a few unanswered questions, but we have Volpe, who are transportation planners, leading this. Some of the trail stuff we just haven't tasked them as closely with that part of it.
I think overall that's good feedback, Nikki, and it's good for us to recognize that that isn't called out as much in the plan as it should be. And I think that's an update we can easily make, and we should make some.
Okay. I'm curious, the last question on this would be, could the grants, I understand the potential grant funding goes to capital improvement. So would that be considered potentially for a grant, like a trail improvement project?
I mean, I would think so. I don't know if you all feel differently, but I would imagine so.
Yeah, we have a almost $5 million trail project going on at Hanging Lake these last 2 years, which is almost entirely grant funded, probably 80% grant funded.
Okay.
So we've had that's our biggest, but we've established this pretty successful model in that case with the National Forest Foundation having a nonprofit partner, or any partner that can come in and kind of they're eligible for acquiring more money. They can take money from federal entities. They're eligible, and they have staff who are like pretty expert in grant applications. So we've used that to piece together a pretty big project with a whole bunch of different funding sources between federal and grants. And that's something that we've talked about a little bit here too. You know, we would need to strategically think, how can we together between us, like when you have feds and a nonprofit and counties and towns together asking for something, and the amount of use we have, I think we can be successful. We having a coordinator kind of help us run that financial to get it off the ground seems to be working for us in other places.
Great, thank you.
Another good rationale for the SUP or whatever, because a concessionaire that's a private business, correct? When you're dealing with grants, you're gonna have a lot higher level of success if it's coming from municipalities and nonprofits or a collaborative effort. And so, at least to start with, it might be the place to start, because you have hopefully a possibility of acquiring more money for every aspect of at least the access plan, and maybe even beyond that, than a private company would.
I've got one question. It's down in the weeds, and I know we're running out of time, but why do we think that having tour buses at Quandary is a good thing?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a good thing, but it's something that's already happening, and it's something that we get not frequent, but Allison could probably answer better than I could, but we probably get half a dozen calls a year from like, oh, we're at a conference in town and our team building activity is we want to hike Quandary. How can we use our charter bus to park there? And, is your parking lot big enough for the charter bus to get in and out of? So maybe we don't need it, and maybe we don't want that use, but if we decide it is appropriate for school groups or corporate groups or whatever to hike Quandary, we got to figure out a way to get those larger vehicles in and out of the parking lot.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, sometimes we are talking about the large charter buses, but the past couple of years, we've even seen like church groups, for example, park the half-size school buses and have like 4 buses all in a row, which take up about 8 to 10 spots. I don't they've probably only paid for one reservation, but that means they're taking up half more spaces than they paid for. So there is that too, as well as the like conversion vans. Those are just a little more oversized than your regular car. So just trying to think of everything more than just your standard like Toyota 4Runner. So just including possible options of what to do.
I'd rather put them in our shuttle system.
To Jordan's point, it's also sustainable in that you're getting a lot of people there occupying less vehicles.
Do
It's
we
not
want
necessarily-
even more though? Is our whole goal to increase the foot count on
Yeah.
Quandary?
No, our goal is to manage to the level we've been seeing in the last 4 or 5 years, not the COVID peak, not the, 45,000 number that maybe CFI envisions as being ideal here, but more like the 25, 30,000 number that we've been seeing in recent years. And even and also with those, I'm remembering with some of those groups, we've even said to them, like, we're not going to allow you to do this on weekends. Like, if you want to take your group up there, it needs to be a Tuesday. And we have, with the parking reservation system, we could build in ways to kind of regulate that use in that way as well.
Yeah, I'll agree too. The COVID peak sort of drove a lot of this. We had a parking task force, the Forest Service did, with a bunch of our law enforcement officers. And I don't know if you remember Quandary then, but they parked out the highway and they parked in everyone's driveways. And that's since that time, we've sort of been on the, we got to address parking. It's part of the reason this plan focuses a little more on parking than trails. It seems like if you don't take care of parking, it's hard to get past there because parking is such a huge issue. But
And I would add a big piece of this, right, is with the trail connectors is to create opportunities also for neighborhoods, communities, other ways to get there besides just driving or the shuttle, right? So idea is try to create some of that hub aspect to it so that you can get to a lot of these places now through hiking different ways that you wouldn't historically get to there. So that's a big piece of this too, is to create that connection, to allow different opportunities to spread out how people are accessing.
You talked in your report here, you talked about using the lower McCullough Gulch parking, which is, fairly small parking lot. But you can do it with public transportation, not even our shuttle, because the public buses have a bus stop right across from that parking spot. And not long ago, I did it that way. And I didn't have to drive my car or take any other paid transportation. It's pretty nice to be able to do that and just go all the way up to McCullough. And that might be something that tourism office could promote a little bit.
it feels like a dream that we've talked about is incorporating trailhead access for these popular places into like the Summit County bus system. But it has also felt like not realistic for to add these other routes at this time.
But that is an existing route.
Yeah.
Or it's your last meeting. It's your time to shine.
Impart some wisdom.
Anything else on this? I know you've done so much work. The county, town, Forest Service. It's amazing.
Yeah, I would like to hear if, how especially BOSAC feels about proposed next step. We're thinking we could dive into the access plan at our next meeting and run it through our new master plan as a sort of filter and determine how we feel about the recommendations listed, go trailhead by trailhead. And if you are amenable to that, is there anything other than just time for all of us to think more about this? Any specific information that you want us to gather before that?
I think that's great if you can kind of sort of identify those points, and we can do the same on our own time about where those things coincide.
Never again.
That's absolutely worthwhile exercise.
Would it be helpful for us? We do have a lot of, throughout this process, we've collected a ton of data from trail counters, parking counters, vehicle counters, counting cars in parking lots, duration of parking, that kind of stuff. We could share a summary of that with you all to have as you're thinking about some of this as well, if you would like to see that.
That would be eye-opening, actually.
And I think that's also really important as we communicate whatever we decide to do to the public, because I think what's been so important about this discussion that we kind of already knew, but I think having the Forest Service here to really illustrate that the people are already here, we know that, but to the extent that we can steer them in the direction where we have the capacity for them to be is so important. We're not going to get around people not coming to Summit County in charter buses anymore, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. And so I think having that just for us to make decisions, but also to pocket it for when we have to communicate what we're doing is going to be super essential.
Got it.
Catherine, I think too, I know it talks about if we had more spots at Quandary, the revenue gain from those reservations would account for the $50,000. I'm trying to remember this exactly.
Oh, the subsidy?
The
that town and
subsidy,
county are
yes.
Providing towards the shuttle system?
Yeah, and it pointed to an appendix A that went into the details on the reservation cost, but I didn't see the appendix.
Oh.
I'd be curious just to see how the
Yeah.
new breakdown would be with those spots.
Yeah, and that's a tough one for us. It's another one where we feel like there will be some trial and error there, right? Because really one of our goals as a Quandary is to provide more parking spaces for people who want to hike McCullough Gulch because the use there has dropped so much. And so we'd like to have some additional parking that we can designate towards the short-term parking reservations so that if people do want to drive there, they can. But at the same time, we don't want to reduce the demand for the shuttle, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to create so much parking that we're not incentivizing people to take the shuttle. So it's another one where we've tried to do the data analysis as best we can, and that's a lot of what's in the appendix, but I imagine that in the actual implementation, there's going to be some figuring that out as we go. Yeah.
Good. David, he had to go to an appointment, but he just wanted to reiterate the importance of the public engagement piece ongoing.
Yeah, and that was something Sam and I talked a little bit about earlier today. And one good example that he reminded me of is that we could pursue if you all were interested in it is in the Frisco backyard NEPA that they've been working on. They've actually had some joint public open houses where the town of Frisco and the Forest Service is putting on these joint open houses. If that was of interest, we could do that. I think Dave and I are going to have another meeting separately at the county level to talk about does our county management want to see more public input or some outreach before we talk to the BOCC? That may be a direction that we're told to go, but I think having those kind of joint NEPA processes going on could be really helpful in just showing the public that, hey, this is a shared resource and we're really trying to figure this all out together.
Yeah. Great. We good on this? Did you get enough, Duke? On
Yeah.
that last question.
Adam and Sam, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah.
Great to have your.
Really nice to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. You can keep that microphone.
Talk into it at home.
Oh, man.
Oh.
Too bad for you.
Would have been great. Next time.
Next time.
Beatles Abbey Road for me.
Should we table the ambassador? I'm thinking, okay, yeah.
Up to you guys, but we can definitely do that discussion at your next individual meeting and at the next OSAC meeting. I know it's getting late, so yeah.
Okay. So then our next item is other matters related to open space. So essentially open forum for any deep yearnings.
For the rec history.
We'll go into staff summary after this. Yeah. Laura, I'm back at you, but it's final meeting. Do you have any parting words, wisdom?
Like I told our people last time, this has truly been the best volunteer position I've had in Summit County. And I've been volunteering in Summit County for over 35 years. A lot of it through the Forest Service and Summit Fat Tire. But there's nothing more rewarding than being trusted by the public to spend money appropriately for the public good. And I feel like OSAC and BOSAC have done a great job because my beginnings were with town's first master plan. And I can't believe where we've gone and what we have. And I'm so grateful both to have new master plans to take it into the future, because that's what's critical at this point, is to keep the momentum going in a positive way. You know, that balance between recreation and natural resources is going to become even more critical as there's more people here. So I thank everybody who devotes their time, both employees and volunteers. But for me, it's been so rewarding. It's not as controversial as so many things. It's just mainly, well, it can be. There's dog poo. E-bikes. But it's, you know, the outcome is always very positive. So anyway, good luck with everything.
Yes,
A lot of
thank you.
Beautiful.
You're legendary. So thanks for,
Would have made a cake.
I know. I suggested a cake.
Okay, I'll be back.
This is your second to last meeting.
With Laura's face on it.
Laura's face on it.
Yeah.
I'm not a good.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else on this one?
Yeah, BOSAC is gonna have the rest of their regular meeting.
Yeah.
So yeah, any other comments you guys have in general for these guys, but otherwise you can stay if you want to, or certainly.
Some of the staff summary does pertain to the county, so you're more than welcome to stay. I can see the thrill on your faces, so. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Next time I'll come to your place, check out your food.
Yeah.
You're gonna need that.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you for your presentation too.
Yeah, right.
No
exactly.
problem.
So
I mean,
you could do that same way next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Future lots. Everything's going good.
Correct.
Trail.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. Peter.
No, I have.
always more meetings, so. Yeah.
And you
Thank you
certainly
so much.
can.
Thank you so much. Adam, thank you.
2 days or so to wrap this up. It'd be a long one.
All right.
You can stay.
So thank you, Paul.
Sam, you can stay too. You don't have to leave. Is it us?
How many hours of meetings has he already sat in this week?
Thanks so much.
Oh,
Can you go back to the attendees one more time?
Hard. Do you remember when Paul won our first trivia?
Laura.
Paul was our first victor.
Thank
Jack, it's like,
Okay. All right. Let's move on. Staff summary.
staff summary. Things want to call out in addition to what's in the packet is, I'm not sure if you've heard, but there's a pile burn scheduled for tomorrow on Ophir Mountain near Frisco. So just a PSA on that. And then wanted to emphasize the Breck history piece, and maybe you have something, Bobby, but Larissa is certainly happy to discuss more, the answer questions we can't answer tonight, or just have a larger discussion at a subsequent meeting.
I just had one quick question.
What do you got? And if I don't know the answer, we'll get it for you.
I noticed that they were putting some money into a privately owned little thing that was gonna end up looking like a cabin. Do they typically do that? Do they use their funds to improve private property?
You remember which one that
At the
was?
Preston?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robin Theobald's cabin,
Oh.
in the Preston area. That whole landscape there is kind of like a little ledge of Forest Service and a little piece of
Cabin
I
two.
actually can't answer that question. I don't know if you guys can.
No, and I don't think it happens a lot, but just knowing the partner that we with and and it's maybe 5 to 6 feet that that cabin goes on to is limited. I do think they focus on, municipality, town and Summit County open space parcels that they focus on, but this one just happens to be like dividing the line where just a little bit of that cabin goes on. Robin Theobald's, who is a good partner for the town and has been, and we has a good reputation.
And Bobby, this is just very visible by the public. Like people would go past this all the
Wasn't
time.
objecting to it.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if that was common for them to do.
Also, relay that question to Larissa. She'll have a more thorough answer than we can provide.
Do you know indeed that the National Forest Land is not involved with that? I mean,
Another
there is
question we
such a
can-
hodgepodge of ownership in
Yeah.
that area. Has a landline survey been done to make certain it's not on the forest?
I believe there are boundary markers out there. I think that's probably another question we have to pose to Larissa.
Because I know the forest surveyed all that stuff out a couple
Mhm.
decade ago in anticipation for the greater, Breckenridge Fields project. So there are boundary markers out there.
There are, yeah.
Just want to verify that it's not on the forest.
Got it. We'll relay that as well.
Do you have anything else on staff summary? Good.
So nothing's gonna be done on mini mine this year, like that's been tabled into a smaller scope of work.
Absolutely, yeah. It may be brought back in some other form or the same form, but it's not on the docket for 2025.
Okay, Jay, council matters.
Paul had
Oh,
one.
Paul.
On the item related to the Bonanza Trail easement.
Hmm.
I'm reading the summary on that. First off, kudos to everybody that's worked on acquiring that parcel for public use and ownership. And then kudos again to the next team, which I guess is primarily the county and the forest, county, Breckenridge and Blue River, in looking to secure an easement on the adjacent piece of property, which will make the trail a little bit more useful to get it down to the river. And I'm not sure if I read it in there or found it elsewise, is my understanding is the town is looking to get a grant in order to build a bridge there.
That's correct. With sponsorship from the county and Blue River, we've applied for it's a GoCo Community Impact Grant. And part of it is for the bridge that would cross Pennsylvania Creek there.
Only hesitation, first off, kudos, make it happen,
Uh-huh.
not yet. And the reason I say that goes to if you build it, they will come. That trail, once you cross the river, two significant impacts. It puts people in direct use of the Royal Placer. There's 3 trails on the Royal Placer on the south side of the river. One trail goes to the west into a subdivision in the town of Blue River, for which there is no public easement to get across private property. The second trail goes up the drainage along Pennsylvania Creek on the south side and goes into pretty sensitive habitat. I mean, there's a social trail there, it's been there for decades, but that trail just kind of peters out into the forest. And do we want people there is a question. The third trail, obviously, is the Blue River Trail, which continues to the south, works its way another 2 or 3 miles. That trail, I've got some concerns with that. Physically, it's there. Everybody's been using it, but it crosses at least 4 different pieces of private property for which no local government has got an easement. I believe Town Blue River is working on it. Forest Service is not doing anything with the easements there. But my concern is if you build that bridge, you're advertising, come see this new trail. And are we inviting trespass into private lands that'll shoot us in the foot in the future when we want to ask those people for permission to use their land? So maybe it's a timing on when you actually build the bridge and work with the town of Blue River in order to speed up any negotiations for those other easements. So.
Thanks, Paul. Yep, those are good points. And we've worked with Michelle on some of those easements, and we may be that section that's crossing private land closest to the south. We may be wanting to reroute that part of trail onto the new Clyde Load portion that we own, just on the bench. But then further south, there are other challenges, and noted that we need to be respectful of the the timing of the bridge and access if we haven't secured easements or solutions for that.
And the other comment related to the Clyde load. Since that became public ownership, kudos again to the team of people who brought that forward into the East Blue River Vegetation Management Project. Because now that area will also be cut along with the Royal and other national forest lands there. So we're getting that done all at once. It's really important though, for somebody to go out there and lay out the proposed new routing of the trail across the
Yep.
Clyde load before
The cutting.
the contractor gets in there and starts cutting stuff into piles that'll eventually get burned, because the piles may be in a location where we want the trail to be. And is there a way to lay that trail out to avoid the piles being put in the trail? And having been there sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes twice a day, I'd volunteer for where to lay out that trail.
We might take you up on that, but thank you. Another good point.
Okay. Now, Jay, council matters.
I do not have any council matters related to open space, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have from the last meeting for those parts.
I have a couple just scheduling things I wanted to share with BOSAC. Jay, you, of course, knows this. Tomorrow, Merge will be presenting at council, so tune in if you're interested. But also on the February 11th council meeting, which is before our next BOSAC meeting, Sam and Adam and I will be presenting the Camp Hale access plan recommendations for discussion with council. So a couple council agenda items you might be interested in viewing.
Great. We done? We did it? Okay, I will move to adjourn.
I second.
Thanks. Good on the seconds.
Thank you.
It's turning into the
That was a
every version on the
productive
second
meeting. Thank you.
Eric used to have.
Catherine,
Go ahead, second.
thanks, Paul.